Acorn and Commodore soar as Coleco and Atari falter. Software takes center stage in PC clone world, and UK game prices hit rock bottom. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, Alex.
Happy to be here, Carl.
Excellent. So, as always, before we turn on the time machine and head back 40 years to April of 1984, it's time for obligatory podcast banter. So, what have you been up to?
Oh, nothing too much. Got the podcast keeping on. New Final Fantasy XIV expansion comes out in like 3 weeks. So I've been picking up my play there, tying up some loose ends before the new one drops.
Very cool.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, that actually sounds like fun. Although I have to admit, other than being an Ultima Online beta tester, MMOs have never attracted me one iota, sadly.
That's fair. I tend to like certain MMOs, I must say. So you were a beta tester. Were you there the day Lord British died?
No, I was a beta tester who was still using a 28.8 modem, and basically kind of gave up very quickly after my first character, it took way too long to create the damn thing, was killed in the marketplace because I clicked on something, not understanding what I was doing, and by the time the lag caught up with me, I had been butted to death by a cow. I am not kidding you.
Phenomenal.
That was the actual story, and all I remember is my character's lying there dead, and some people are laughing at me. And
if anyone here does a social history, if anyone listening, I should say, does a social history of Ultima Online, be sure to contact Carl, because that anecdote, his brief time in the game, deserves to be recorded. That anecdote is delightful.
Oh, yes. And then I created a second character and basically ran around and did what Lord British loves talking about today, and I actually saw him present a whole talk on this at DragonCon years ago. I just saw a band of people running around killing everything they could find in the wilderness, and I ran along with them for about an hour. And I realized, okay, this is kind of boring, and because the lag was such a problem and everything else, I just kind of gave up on it after that. So
I do not blame you. MMOs are very different today from the Ultima Online days, obviously. But I do have to wonder, Carl, because cows are pretty docile creatures. What acts were you performing on that cow that provoked it to headbutt you to death?
I literally just wanted to click on an empty space to walk there, and between when the lag happened, I clicked on the thing. By the time I finally had some semblance of control, or thought I had control again, I was already dead. So I have no idea exactly what happened. It may have been something else completely. I don't think that they had safe zones in the cities activated yet at that point. But whatever the case may be, it was bad.
Let me tell you, that is the most extreme game of click moo I have ever heard recounted.
Yeah, it was really quite a disappointing experience, and I was so hyped. I mean, I was so hyped to get that demo disc, and popped it in, installed it.
I mean,
Yeah.
You had to pay what, like $2.50 or something like that
I can't
for
remember.
it, right?
It was more like 5 or 15. I mean, you pay. It was still pennies. I mean, considering that you were jumping on to play this, but yeah, it was around this weird time when there were so many weird experiments for online play. I think around the same time, MTV had this Tiki Hut gimmick going over the summer and they had set up this chat program where you could fly around. Yeah, you were represented. Your avatar was a tiki mask, and you could talk to other people and fly around in this 3D space and talk to these other floating tiki heads. And it actually, had it so that the closer you got to a conversation, the louder it was. So you could hear, conversations off in the distance and stuff. This is obviously all happening over a 28.8 modem, so it was janky as hell. But just the sheer concept of the potential of it was you put up with all the crap back then just because you could see the potential in it. What can I say? I mean, now that I'm saying it out loud, my whole Dragon's Lair, just seeing the potential in something, mania, it never really died, is what I'm trying to say. Refinement in gameplay, who needs that? I heard, and we're recording this in the middle of June. I just got the news Civilization 7's coming in. I just yawned. I was like, What's the point? Come on. But that's just me. Okay. I don't need things to be refined. I just want that first initial burst of potential and then move on. But okay.
Indeed.
I'm weird. Now, okay, we've talked enough and we have so much to cover today.
Yes.
So, everybody, remember the whole premise of the show is that we are going to be looking at news from magazines and newspapers dated April of 1984 on the episode today. So obviously the news in some occasions happened considerably earlier. It's a framing device. Please don't send me emails about that. But you can send me emails or messages or follow us on the socials and tell me anything that you like, dislike, etc., about the show by contacting us there. The links are in the show notes. And if you are one of the people who is watching on or listening on YouTube, the YouTube always cuts off the show notes, which are usually quite extensive. With all of our sources, you can find those just by following the link at the top of the link section below, which leads you to the Patreon page where you can access this episode. You don't have to be a patron, although that would be very nice if you were, and find all the links there. I think I put that should cover all of the required disclaimers, correct?
I think so.
Excellent.
I think so.
Good. Then
don't winners don't do drugs. I think you forgot that.
No, winners don't do drugs. There you go. Or just say no. I can't remember which era I'm supposed to be doing this in. So, wait, it's 1984. We don't have winners don't do drugs yet. It's just Nancy
that's
Reagan
true. That's more
just
that is
no.
more appropriate. That is more appropriate for a 90s jump. I was just trying to do the one that had video game relevance.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I mean, there must have been an anti-drug game at this point already. Somebody must have tried it. But, oh well. Okay, that being said, everybody, before we can turn on the time machine and start looking at the headlines from April 1984, we have to first deal with the first segment of the show, which is the 7 Minutes in Heaven, in which our intrepid co-host must play a game that was reviewed in a publication dated April 1984 for 7 minutes, it has to be a game that they've never played before. We had a whole mess of interesting titles. We had Ultima 2 on the Commodore 64. We had Jumpman Jr. on the ColecoVision, Book Rogers for ColecoVision, Punch-Out in the arcades, 10-Yard Fight, Bruce Lee, although we may get back to that one later, Major Havoc, the Rainbow Walker, but we went, and here I have to admit I kind of forced this upon the poor gent, with the ZX Spectrum Classic from Ultimate, Atic Atac. So,
That's right.
Alex, are you ready to be attacked in an attic?
Let's go collect some pieces of the Triforce on the ZX Spectrum, Carl.
Excellent. Welcome back, Alex, from your 7 minutes in heaven. So, for the uninitiated, how would you describe Atic Atac based on your 7 minutes with the game?
Well, I would say that Atic Atac is a very early form of what today we would call an action-adventure kind of game, kind of in the Zelda mold. Obviously, it predates Zelda by several years. And it may have possibly, though there's no way to prove that at the moment, inspired some of the aesthetic design of Legend of Zelda, though certainly not the gameplay design more broadly. So yeah, action adventure game, kind of like a proto Zelda.
Interesting. And since this is a ZX Spectrum game, and we've only made you play one ZX Spectrum game before this, and you kind of cheaped out and didn't even use a proper emulation that time, Manic Miner being that title, what was your impression of the graphics of the game?
Well, they're very good for a Specky, of course, because it's Ultimate, right? I mean, there's a lot of the graphics are fairly rudimentary of the monsters and the objects, and they are subjected to the usual color clash that you're going to find. But the 3D effect to create the rooms, especially to create the cave rooms in the basement, are really quite impressive, and certainly somewhat mind-boggling on a Spectrum, which is what Ultimate was known for.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the Ultimate was also known for the frantic nature of many of their games. I mean, their advertisements at this point for their games is a melted Competition Pro joystick. The pacing of the game, how did you find that?
I mean, the pacing is definitely something I was not a fan of. I'm being more used to later games and kind of the Legend of Zelda mold, where you kind of have a fixed group of enemies in your space and you're kind of maneuvering around somewhat tactically in order to tackle things in a good order. This is just monsters coming right for you, press A kind of thing, and they're constantly respawning all over the place, and it's kind of hard to avoid them. It becomes kind of a little bit more manic than I would prefer, I would say.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you can really feel the lack of computer resources and having to use the crutch of random placement, random action, just throw stuff at you in order to hide the fact that most of it is probably not really planned out. It's just we couldn't do anything else. We just got the enemies on the screen. And color clash, of course, being what Speckies do best.
Absolutely. But I mean, the premise is interesting. The idea that you have to gather these things, you have to map out and explore this place, gather these things, and you have a limited inventory that forces you to make choices. I think that's all quite good, and especially quite novel for 1983. I think it would probably still hold up as a game for me today, if not for the way the monsters randomly spawn and randomly zip around the screen, which kind of kills it for me personally.
I totally understand, and we're going to be seeing a lot of that over the next couple of years.
Indeed.
Okay, so would you recommend this game to a modern player?
So the answer, I usually give a yes or a no there. The answer I would honestly give is maybe. Because I do think it could be a fun game for somebody who's into exploring a space and gathering all the stuff to waste a few hours, but only if they don't mind the absolutely obnoxious and relentless enemy spawns. if that's too much for you, there are far better games with the same kind of exploration and inventory management component that you can play. But if that doesn't turn you off, it holds up surprisingly well, considering it's a 1983 kind of game, 83, 84.
There you go. Everybody, you heard it here first. Go play an Atic Atac if you're a masochist. Okay. Okay, we've got one more order of business before we can turn on the time machine, and that is to check in with our good friend Ethan for a little section we call the Department of Corrections.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan. So, before we
Carl.
Yes.
It's 1984, once again.
Yes.
What is your feeling about the war with Eurasia?
Newspeak does not have words to express my non-agitation at this war with Eurasia. But I do know that it has always been going, or something. It's been too long since I read the damn book, okay?
Newspeak poetry is something else. Oh, also, hi, Alex.
Well, hello there.
You're here for the Department of Corrections in March 1984.
Is the Department of Corrections here to make sure that 1984 will not be like 1984?
The opposite of that. We've been going on this for all the 1984 jumps so far.
And I still haven't gone back to read the book, so, you know.
I mean, I haven't read it since high school either, but...
Exactly.
Good book. It's a good book, though. It's not just about forming your whole political opinion around it. It's just a good book, okay?
In fairness, Ethan, your high school and Carl's high school, there is a bit of a gap there in terms of temporal proximity.
Indeed.
You mean not
But
everybody went
Alex-
to high school in the 90s? What's wrong with this picture?
But Alex, you have a comment to reckon with, because I need to get on you for this, because you keep doing it, and I have to stop you. Alex, that quote about the Stampers reportedly saying something, that one of their games is related to Zelda is
Night Lore,
not
right?
about Atic Atac.
It's about Night Lore, right? Did I actually say it was about
No,
Atac
it's
this
about
time?
Saber Wolf.
Oh, it's about Saberwolf. Okay. Because I think this time I might have said it in reference to Night Lore, because you did drum it into my head that it was not about Atic Atac.
Yeah,
But
you said Atic Atac.
that's weird, because I know that. Like, for reals, I know that. So I take your word for it. I just blab, and then someone puts it on the internet. So I take your word for it. But
I remember we looked at this when Kate was doing her video on, early Metroidvanias, basically. We was like, we need to find the quote. And then we did, and it's about Saberwolf, not about...
Well, hold on, but I'm thinking back to the episode now, though. Did I say that the quote was about that, or did I just say that there are a lot of similarities between Atic Atac and The Legend of Zelda? Because that is a true statement, regardless of what the quote is about.
Okay, I don't remember, but you said Atic Atac, and...
Because I think I might have just pointed out the similarity. Like, I haven't listened to it in a while, so I could be wrong. The listeners will have to decide. But I'm pretty sure this time what I just did was said that there were a lot of similarities between them. I don't think I pulled out the Stamper quote. But
and I would agree, because Atic Atac is much, much closer in design to Zelda than Saberwolf.
I mean, we all acknowledge that, but it's just...
Yeah.
Well, once upon a time, Alex would say on his podcast.
No, I did.
The Stampers said that Legend of Zelda is a ripoff of Atic Atac, and that's not what they reportedly said. So,
well, right? No, that's absolutely true. I did give the quote in an improper context in the past, but I'm pretty sure in this episode I just made a cheeky remark about how they were similar without making any reference to the Stamper quote. But if I'm wrong, listeners know how to reach Carl.
And add to the great list of the Department of Corrections for all that. But yes, March 1984, in deep in the not quite fallow period. I mean, you guys did see the length of the last episode, right? But
that's the fallow period.
But definitely a tumultuous time for the video game industry. Carl, present yourself in your best military honors, and we will get the show going.
I'm ready.
10 hut. Okay, first of all, Carl made a very obscure reference at the very beginning of the show, referring to me doing the history. I have to correct this. It is you am do the history. The history. No, with no vowel in the middle there. For those who do not get this, and no one would be able to get this, on Discord, my default message says me am do the history because I thought it was funny. And so that's what he was referencing.
This is true. That is what I was referencing.
Next up, the Versus system is not entirely identical to the Famicom. There are a few small differences. It's not in stuff like RAM, but it is in stuff like palette choices and whatnot. There are a few differences from what is in the home system.
Are those determined by the monitors being used in the cabinets or by actual chip changes?
That is a difference in the PPU chip. They made some revisions at some point that got put into the Versus system.
Cool.
I did not know that. That is a good factoid.
Yes, people get very obsessive about these things. If you ever want to talk to, if you want to be talked to for hours about something, ask Frank about Frank Cifaldi about NES color palettes, and he will regale you.
That sounds accurate.
On another interchangeable system, the Maxiflex. Carl mentioned a bit of stuff regarding that. That was not my research. That was Keith Smith's research.
Yeah, I know I got it from you, but yes, Keith.
Rest in peace, Keith. I don't think you're dead, but, you know.
He has spurred both of us into our research in many ways. If you are out there, Keith, please send us an email, please. Then
Keith Smith to the courtesy phone on the internet. Keith Smith to the courtesy phone on the internet.
AKA direct messaging.
Yes.
Then speaking of similarities from earlier, Freeway is not based on Frogger. There is absolutely no way it could have been.
Nope. That is true.
It is a similar type of game, but they are not based on each other. Freeway came out like September 1981. Frogger came out in, I think, even Japan in August 1981. So yeah, it did not happen that way. David Crane has given lots of interviews of how he came up with it.
Yes.
Very cool.
Then I forget exactly what the context of this was. It had to do with piracy on PC and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things about, you know, making up for the volume in the market is that there was a pretty big hope among a lot of the computer software companies that copy protection on disks would be able to save them in the piracy terms. And a lot of them did come up with some pretty ingenious solutions. EA had Jim Nichols came up with a very hard to break solution. Very famously, FTL Games came up with a very tough to crack one on Dungeon Master. So there were lots of attempts to try and stymie all that. Of course, you know, that's a giant history in itself. But I think the implication was that they shouldn't have even tried, but they definitely did try.
Well, I mean, you have to try, right? Because, you can never admit defeat, but it's kind of a futile endeavor most of the time.
It would have been easier.
Yeah. You notice, was this, I don't remember, was this one of the episodes where I caught Carl on a couple of things before you had a chance to? Were there a couple of moments in this one where you were starting to salivate at the old DOC and get the implements ready, and then I popped in and was like, actually, Carl.
There was one or two that you,
just one or two, but it was a 5-hour episode, so let's just keep that in perspective here.
And we still have a few more on this one. This one is more commentary than correction, as I often do. This is my way to sneak on the show, folks. You mentioned that Atari, that it had lots of spin-offs and all this kind of stuff. And to my mind, Atari really is the seed of modern Silicon Valley. Even though there's not as many companies that still exist that were spun off from Atari. There basically, when you get this boom in the 80s of just whole bunch of companies in all sorts of fields, consumer, business, all that kind of stuff, it really comes out of what Atari was doing, and then people breaking off from them to do their own thing.
That's true. And I do think that historians, actual, professional university historians are more and more coming to that conclusion as well as they write books on Silicon Valley.
And we mentioned in the last live stream that we did with TCW and Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, Alex and I have been poking around the idea of writing the Atari book. And part of my framing for that is Atari in Silicon Valley. That's kind of a working title. Don't know if it's going to ultimately be that, but that's kind of a perspective that I've been looking at a bit more closely.
Makes perfect sense. And we'll actually have an interesting story about that in this episode, actually.
Okay. Now, Tetris things. Because you were off on a thing about NovaTrade. NovaTrade had nothing to do with Tetris. You were thinking of Andromeda Software, which was operated by a Hungarian.
Yeah. Well, did Andromeda have connections with Eastern European developers before they hooked up with NovaTrade?
They were an Eastern European developer.
Well, Andromeda wasn't an Eastern European developer.
Well, you're right. They were a licensing
product from the East.
Thing.
But I couldn't. For some reason, I had it in the back of my head that NovaTrade was their first connection to Eastern Europe.
Might
some
be.
of the very early Andromeda games were actually developed in England.
Yeah. Robert Stein was from Hungary.
Well, yeah.
So.
Yeah, but
I think he was eventually going to make that bridge, but the implication you said is that NovaTrade had something to do with Tetris, and they did not.
NovaTrade was basically what gets that connection going so that it could even be discovered. At least that's how I had it in my brain. It could be that NovaTrade and that Andromeda, had already established some connections prior to NovaTrade.
Yeah, I don't.
In London.
Yeah, I'd have to, and I'm gonna do a little because I can search the Kindle copy of the Tetris Effect pretty easily here. I don't recall any sources saying that it was specifically NovaTrade where Robert Stein saw it.
No, he saw it at an institution.
Yeah,
he sees it as an institution.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But the question is NovaTrade the ones that even get Andromeda interested in the Eastern European developers? Is that the bridge? Because remember, NovaTrade has that very weird structure where it's suddenly a for-profit corporation in the Eastern Bloc. You wouldn't just be able to go to Eastern Europe and say, hey, does anybody have a program for me to sell?
Well, One way or another, that's just something I wanted to note. That they don't factor into the Tetris story directly, at least.
Yeah, no, and I'm sorry if that's the way it came across. That wasn't what I was trying to imply. It was just like in my brain, that's the timeline, and if I'm wrong on that, that would be unfortunate. But it was always in the back of my mind that Novotrade is what gets Andromeda.
So I don't believe that is probably accurate because Andromeda was founded in 1982. Tetris Effect doesn't say exactly what year he started going to Hungary, but the company was founded in 1982, and the implication is it was pretty soon after that, and that feels to me like it's before Novotrade was really getting going. But that's all still just circumstantial. It's not like, definitive.
Yeah, well, and this is why I think Andromeda did a couple of ports for Atari titles.
Mm-hmm.
But those are, I think, still programmed by English developers.
Right.
Yeah, they definitely had other English software.
Oh yeah, no, I know.
Tetris,
I know.
But
I know.
Anyways, we will have to leave this to a research question for now, and future Department of Corrections may or may not update on this.
There you go.
One final thing for March 1984. Speaking about the James Bond text adventures, I'm very surprised, Alex. No mention of Raymond Benson in there.
Good point.
For those who don't know, Raymond Benson, he started out doing these adaptations of James Bond books as bookware. Later on, he became the head writer for Ultima 7, in which he used a James Bond plot structure because he's just a big fan of the movie or the franchise. And then later on, he became the official novel series writer for James Bond.
Yes.
Interesting.
That is all very true. And yeah, obviously stuff I've reported on at various times in my own episodes, but I can't keep it all in my head for Recall on Demand. So thank you for providing us that additional context, because that is a fascinating little story there.
Okay, Carl, Alex, you are being sent off to war. Thanks much for coming by. We hope to see you again next time in the Department of Corrections for March 1994. 10 hut!
As always, Ethan, thank you for your service.
And go!
Yeah, of course I was there, so there's not much more to say, but just to follow up a little more on the Freeway Frogger thing, David Crane has given two complementary, not contradictory, origins for that. Both are about attending the CES in Chicago, which is in a convention center right next to a major highway. One story he tells is about how they all exited through the wrong door and got locked out once and had to navigate traffic very precariously to get back in. The other is a bunch of them saw a poor person, not someone they knew, just trying to cross that highway outside the convention center. And that's what he says gave him the idea for Freeway, which definitely came out too close to Frogger that they could have been influencing each other. Frogger being a Japanese game of that era, particularly from the inscrutable Konami, we don't have any indication of its origins, though there was a lie on the internet for a very long time that got into Wikipedia and infected the net that way that has since been purged.
Excellent. And see, everybody, you learn something when you come here.
Indeed.
Okay, so we've got that cleared up. I think it's time for us to finally turn on the time machine and head back not 40, not 50, not even 60, but 70 years to April of 1954. And we don't have a sound effect for this one, so whatever was popular in April of 1984. And normally I should be looking 54. These up ahead of time. top hits.
I think Elvis is just getting started. I mean, he's not going to be topping the Billboard charts in 1954, but I think That's All Right Mama was before April. I'm looking.
Make Love to Me, Joe Stafford.
No, it was July. That's All Right was July. So
we got Perry Como.
Of course we do.
Because, it's the 50s. Come on. So Make Love to Me by Joe Stafford. I have no idea what that is. Wanted by Perry Como. That takes on a life of its own. So that's the top. And if you guys want to Google that and listen to it, go right ahead. So, with that being said, welcome to April of 1954. What's our headline?
Well, it seems the Kefauver hearing puts pressure on comics industry.
Senator Estes Kefauver. Kefauver? Kefauver. Is it Kefauver?
Kefauver, maybe? Kefauver.
Yeah.
I don't know. Our Department of Corrections can do the IPA lookup. I'm not going to.
There you go. Well...
Yeah, it's either Kefauver or Kefauver, I guess, depending on where you put the emphasis.
Whatever the senator's name is, he has held 2 days of hearings on the negative effects of comic books on the youth of America. The comic book industry seems to be distinguishing between horror and crime comics and all others on the market as a defense.
Yes, I love that this was, 54, just like the video game one was 94. I love these little synchronicities in history like that. And of course, the good senator here, Mr. Estes, since we're not touching that last name, was a well-known crusader in the Congress at this time. His far more famous hearings was the Kefauver Commission, where he did a deep dive into organized crime and the impact of the mafia in America, which was partially dramatized in the fictionalized form in The Godfather Part 2.
Yes, definitely, yeah.
But yeah, you've got the exact same situation here that you would have in video games later, which I know we've talked about in other episodes. But basically, the comic book industry is growing up. It is for a wide variety of readers, not just kids anymore. But public perception of comics have not caught up, especially since pictures and word bubbles seems like a very basic form of reading compared to War and Peace. And so you have this thing where the industry is getting far more violent in a lot of ways, and nobody has recognized that it's not just for kids anymore. And so it's like, think of the children, they're being exposed to this depravity. And there was some depravity. I mean,
oh yeah,
the horror comics and the crime comics were getting pretty dark, for sure.
Oh yeah, no, very, very dark. I mean, those old issues of Tales from the Crypt and stuff. Oh my God. But, I mean, it's also interesting if you think about it. It's about 15 years from the dawn of the industry. Late 30s when we get the Supermans and whatnot. The standalone original material comic books to this point. And it was about 15 years after the real dawn of the video game industry that you get this. And it's literally just the kids didn't stop reading. So now there's material for those same kids. And it just takes that long. That's the period of time where the medium is suddenly going to come under scrutiny.
Yes, and of course, I'm sure we'll cover this in some other jumps, but this becomes the object lesson in what the video game industry truly wanted to avoid, because, of course, the solution that ends up being implemented in comic books basically destroys comic books as an art form in many ways for a good, 4 decades.
Yeah, it's not pretty. But, and the rest of, and we should say here in the United States, and the rest of the world, comics will continue to thrive and evolve and do their own thing. It's just the U.S. industry gets neutered.
Absolutely.
So
yes, I that's a good clarification. I did mean specifically the U.S. industry and not other parts of the world. All the stuff going on in the Francophone world in Europe or in manga in Japan, obviously not affected by these events.
Of course, yeah. So, okay, well, we've got that out of the way, and let's move forward 10 years to April of 1964. And again, we don't have a sound effect for this one, but let's see, what could have been.
It's about
big
the start of
in 64?
Beatlemania. This is about the start of Beatlemania, I think. Is April when they came over?
Yeah, that could be. When did they have their appearance?
Oh, it was February that they came over. But when did they have their Ed Sullivan appearance?
Let's see. It's the Billboards. I'm looking at the top 100 songs for 1964.
Yeah.
The Beatles
so
have the
February,
top 2.
So we passed. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is Beatlemania has begun and is still catching.
Yeah, so I mean, it's either that or number 3 song is "Hello Dolly" by Louis Armstrong, and number 4 is "A Pretty Woman" by Roy Orbison. I will take any of the above answers as correct. So, and "Everybody Loves Somebody" by Dean Martin is number 6. So I'm sold. Everybody. In case you were wondering what my musical tastes are, this is it. So,
they are old.
Very, very old. My grandmother loved Louis Armstrong, and that just kind of bled through. So, okay.
Totally fair.
Now, what is our headline?
Well, it's a kind of big one in the world of computing as IBM announces the 360.
Oh, yeah. Before Microsoft did it with the Xbox. The IBM 360 computer line would introduce many innovations to commercial computing, but most importantly, it would create a compatibility standard for software between machines in the line, a concept that would revolutionize how computers were designed going forward.
Absolutely. So before the System 360, there was basically no conception of a single computer model being available at various levels of power and performance. If you needed less computing power, you bought this model. If you needed more computing power, you bought this model. And they would have different internal architectures. They would take completely different peripherals. They would take completely different software. And so what IBM decided to do was unify their entire line by having a similar architecture from the very low end to the very high end. And so you could still, if you needed more computing power later, you could upgrade to a later model in the line, and you would not have to replace all your printers and tape drives and teletypes and software programs. It was a huge gamble because if it had failed, they would have ended up destroying their interest in their existing line for something that did not take off. It was seen as a humongous gamble at the time. And how to introduce it was very delicate because they had to be sure not to alienate their customers and cannibalize their sales of their existing product in order to serve this new product. But obviously it all worked out in the end for IBM, and it is really the System 360 that truly created Big Blue. I mean, they were the leader in the industry before the System 360, but this is where you get to the point where they get their ridiculous, 70, 80% market share of the mainframe market is after the 360.
And we should also note that this is also the beginning of people making compatible peripherals for a existing computer. So there's going to be a cottage industry, and we've reported on this in our 1970s jumps over the years, but there will be a cottage industry of companies that aren't making the complete line at the beginning, at least. Later on, there will be people making complete systems that are compatible, but a lot of peripherals and so forth that are compatible with the 360.
Absolutely. And also, it's a turning point. It'll take a few more years before a third-party software industry starts to emerge, but it's also what allows for a third-party software industry to start emerging, too. This idea that you'll have a wide range of users using, because otherwise it just wasn't economical before, because there were just too many models, and there was really no clear winner that a peripheral maker or a software maker could necessarily target, particularly since IBM provided all of that as well. They provided peripherals and software. So yeah, I mean, this is really, in a lot of ways, the birth of the computer industry as we know it today.
Yeah, it's a huge, huge moment.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to keep moving on. This is just a blip on the map at this point, and we now come to our April 1974 jump. And we do have a sound effect there.
1974. You'll talk to the computer. After the eyes flash.
Welcome back to April of 1974. Alex, what's our first story?
Oh, you're hitting me right in the corporate shenanigans, Carl. Sega becomes American.
Sega Enterprises Incorporated has had its IPO in the USA and is now the owner of Sega Enterprises Limited of Japan. This marks a shift for the company, with David Rosen at its head and Gulf and Western its major stockholder. Games will still be developed in Japan, but Sega plans to establish large-scale distribution on both the west and east coast of the USA with full-time sales and support staff.
So, yeah, as is always the case, you said, did we mention all the caveats? Well, there's one we didn't mention because it only comes up occasionally, and that is we are reporting the headlines as they were reported. Which sometimes means some of the details, especially when it comes to corporate shenanigans, could be slightly off. So this was the headline in Cashbox. They referred to it making its debut as an over-the-counter stock the week before. There's a little more complicated shenanigans going on here, and because I can't resist a good shenanigan, you're going to have to listen to them. So Gulf and Western had first bought Sega, the majority of Sega, back in 1969. And they initially, after kind of the initial transition period, they placed it under a subsidiary called Gulf and Western Far East Pacific. And the idea of this company, which was actually headed by David Rosen, is they were hoping that Sega would be the first of many acquisitions that they made in the East to create kind of an Eastern conglomerate very similar to the Western-facing Gulf and Western conglomerate that already existed. So the idea of Gulf and Western Far East Pacific, according to Rosen in one of his rare interviews, was that he would go out and look for other companies to acquire and conglomerize. And so he moved to Hong Kong. Sega stayed in Japan, but he moved his offices to Hong Kong and tried to do this whole thing. It ended up not really working out. We don't have a lot of details on why, but I will say that this was about the end of the conglomerate era. Conglomerates came about for a reason. I'm not an economic historian, so I forget them off the top of my head, but there were conditions that were very favorable to conglomerating in the 60s, and in the 70s, those were kind of going away. And so that never really worked out. So Rosen had always wanted to take Sega public, and the reason that they went with Gulf and Western instead is because they couldn't see a path forward to becoming public all by themselves as essentially an American company in Japan. They would have been the first coin-operated company to ever go public in Japan, and they would have been the first American-owned company to go public in Japan since World War II. So the hurdles were very great, which is why they ended up going this way. So when the conglomerating thing failed, they still very much wanted to be a public company. So what happened is Gulf and Western has a lot of subsidiaries. It is a conglomerate in the true sense of the word. I always like bringing up Mel Brooks's parody in a silent movie, Engulf and Devour, which was a play on Gulf and Western because they very much did engulf and devour. So they had a wholly owned subsidiary called Consolidated Brands, which was obviously a holding company. And that holding company had a 53% stake in a publicly traded cosmetics firm called the Polly Bergen Company, named after the actress. Well, they had decided to get out of that cosmetics business, so in 1973, they had actually sold off most of the assets, rights, and trademarks to another company called Fabergé Inc., which effectively left Polly Bergen as a shell corporation. It was holding on to some debt or something, but it had no active business anymore. So rather than take Sega public, what they did is a bit of corporate shenanigan, because Polly Bergen was already a publicly traded company. They did a reverse stock split of Polly Bergen in order to pump up the value of the individual stock shares. So it increased the par value from 10 cents per share to $1 per share with a 10-to-1 reverse stock split. Then Polly Bergen acquired Sega Enterprises Limited from Gulf and Western Far East Pacific in exchange for stock. But all of these companies are owned by Gulf and Western. So that had the effect of increasing Gulf and Western's stake in the Polly Bergen Company from 53% to 95%, because a company owned by them was just giving its stock to another company owned by them.
Oh,
and
Jesus.
So they got rid of Gulf and Western Far East Pacific, and Sega Enterprises Limited became a subsidiary, wholly owned, I believe, of Polly Bergen Company. Polly Bergen Company was then renamed Sega Enterprises Incorporated. And so there are actually two Segas in this time period, Sega Enterprises Inc. and Sega Enterprises Limited. Sega Enterprises Limited is the Japanese company that we would think of as being Sega today, the company that then Gulf and Western sold off and put out all the classic video games and the Master System and the Genesis and the Saturn and everything else. Sega Enterprises Incorporated was this renamed company, and doing it this way allowed them to go public without actually having to do an IPO. So it was traded because it was still a publicly traded company, and Gulf and Western did not own all the shares. So I think once they took ownership, they may have released a few more shares in the over-the-counter market. I don't know. I don't know the stock market history. But the point is, that's how they became public, and that's how they became an American company. Sega has the most corporate shenanigans of any video game company, and I will never pass up an opportunity to discuss Sega corporate shenanigans. So my apologies to all your listeners, but it had to be done.
No, perfectly okay, and it was much desired, and I knew which hornet's nest I was kicking when I added this story. So everything's good.
Indeed.
But moving on then.
Yes, we do have a few more stories here. The first of these being Mirco Games brings freeplay to video.
Not micro? It's Mirco?
Micro.
Okay. I mistyped that. So, coin-op maker Mirco Games has introduced Challenge, a ball and paddle game with a new feature, free play.
Yes, it is. It is very easy to misread that as micro games, because when your eyes gloss over it, that's the term that makes sense because it's an actual word. But this is Mirco Games, and Mirco Games was one of these small companies that got really big in the cocktail boom that took place in 1973 and into 1974. And yeah, this is more of them, I think, trying to expand their reach into some of these non-traditional venues, which is what the entire cocktail table boom was about at that time.
Yeah. Now, the free play aspect of this, I mean, it does kind of, and I didn't look enough into the history of this, but it does bring video games into that weird gray zone of existing anti-pinball legislation.
Yes.
So suddenly, if you can get a free play in the video game, do the pinball rules or laws apply? And the advertisements for Mirco are actually talking about, hey, we know that this gimmick works. They literally say, the tried and true or a well-tested or something, strategy of the free play is going to increase your sales. And they're not the only ones. Ramtech, there's also a listing this month that Ramtech's Clean Sweep video game, and remember everybody, we're in 74, so video games, almost all of them are just ball and paddle games at this point, with a few exceptions. But Ramtech's Clean Sweep also has a free play for high score feature, and that's shipping this month. So, in Clean Sweep, you just recently talked about this on your episode about Ramtech. On They Create Worlds, Clean Sweep could be seen as a bit of a forebearer to Breakout.
Absolutely.
And so they're adding a free play. Obviously, free play really only works if you have a single player mode, because, I mean, what does free play in a multiplayer mode look like?
Right.
Yeah. So the games had to get to a certain level of complexity in order for free play to make sense, but apparently free play is coming.
Indeed. And that is not the only change that is coming to the economics of the coin-op industry, as Sam Stern urges industry to go to 25-cent play.
Sam Stern, president of Williams, has urged the industry to adopt 3 balls for 25 cents as a norm for pinball machines. The end of government price controls expected at the end of the month will see wages shoot up, and equipment, which is going to increase due to the increased price of commodities, will require this.
Sam Stern thinks inflation is coming to the United States, huh?
Well, I mean...
I wonder.
For those who aren't old enough, this is the time period when we've got an oil crisis and we have the government putting price freezes, so stores cannot charge more than they charged before the freeze was put into place for goods. But the international markets and the futures market have been speculating that commodity prices will go up, no matter what the Nixon administration tries to do about it. And so, he's like, we need to be moving to 3 balls for 25 cents. I mean, most of the machines are still running on dimes.
Yeah, so there's, you kind of have two. So, yeah, you have, I mean, video games and the kind of advanced audiovisual games by this time have pretty well submitted 25-cent play. But as you say, pinball is usually still set either to 10 cents for a single play, or sometimes you'll see 2 plays for a quarter. But even then, the economics are looking kind of weak due to the way the economy is changing. And so Sam Stern is urging what is essentially going to become, and I don't know when, because I haven't researched the pinball side as heavily, but is what essentially is going to become the standard in pinball, which is 3 plays for a quarter, 3 balls for a quarter.
Yeah, and we're going to see that reflected in video games where, you put in your quarter, you get 3 lives. There is a parallel there.
Absolutely.
But, oh well.
While we'll end this look with a way we often end our 80s episodes, but for the 70s this time with a little bit of an in memoriam here, as we have David Gottlieb. R.I.P.
The man whose name was brandished on the very first flipper pinball table has passed. So,
indeed, the legendary David Gottlieb. He got his start in the business by carting a film projector in a Model T across the state of Texas to bring movies to oil towns and other outposts too small to have their own theaters. He started peddling punch boards on the side, gambling devices, which was essentially, in a way, kind of like an advent calendar, except you were paying to open the window and see if you got something good in it. And moved on from those beginnings to get deeper into the actual coin-op industry itself, and founded the D. Gottlieb & Company in 1927 in Chicago, initially to manufacture a grip tester, and was one of the pioneers of the pinball business. His table, Baffle Ball, was a revolution for the business. It was based on earlier tables. It wasn't a revolution in gameplay, but he was able to set up mass production, and he was able to offer them at a far lower price than his competitors, which was crucial with the onset of the Great Depression. And so was really one of the key figures responsible for pinball taking off in a big way in the 30s. And the company remained the leader in the field throughout the 50s and 60s, and until they were finally dethroned by some of the new innovations coming to the field that they weren't equipped for. And Gottlieb was at the company for most of that time. He was no longer leading it at the time he died. He had passed it on to his son-in-law, Judd Weinberg, by this point, but only like a couple of years before this. I mean, he ran the company from 1927 all the way up to the beginning of the 70s, and true legend in the business.
Yeah, and according to Cashbox, his son and brother were also still active at the company, but yeah, he had a long illness and had to step away because of it. So, we say goodbye here once again to an industry legend. So, with that being said, I think it's time for us to turn on the time machine one more time, jump forward 10 years from 1974 to April of 1984, and start chewing on the real meat of this episode.
Worldwide electronic violence. 1984. Intelligence. Custody collapse.
An awful lot of product that was inferior.
Welcome back to April of 1984. Alex, what's our first story?
Well, on a bit of a positive note compared to past months, with, in relation positive, Atari losses fall.
Warner Communications Incorporated reported a first quarter profit of $30.9 million compared to a loss of $18.9 million in the same quarter a year earlier. The company still had an operating loss of $35.7 million, with Atari accounting for $34.9 million of that loss, but the $66.6 million sale of the company's cosmetic and fragrance business pushed them into positive territory. The Atari losses are bad, especially in comparison with their earlier estimates of a $10 million loss, but still better than the first quarter 1983 losses of $45.6 million.
Yeah, it turns out when you burn all your overhead to the ground, your losses decrease.
Yeah, imagine that, and you can try to hide the fact that you're still losing your shirt by selling off assets, because, you can do that for forever.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's only positive relative to the past. They're not bleeding as much, but at this point, they really should have no longer been bleeding at all if this was going to continue to be a viable business for Warner to be in. I mean, they can't wait for them to cut their losses by 5 or 10 million every quarter for another 4 or 5 quarters.
Exactly. I mean, going from 45 million loss to 34.9 million loss and pretending like, yeah, this is great. I mean, they do this for another year. It's just going to kill the company. And the worst part is Warner has also canceled their movie deal with the Ladd Company. That was Ladd Company was made up of a bunch of executives from other companies that had started this thing. Because they've had a whole bunch of big budget flops like Right Stuff and Blade Runner, which cost Warner a ton of money. But they also canceled it just as Police Academy, also a Ladd Company movie, has hit theaters, and it's the biggest thing in the country, yeah. And it's going to continue to be that. And so Warner Brothers is only going to have the release rights, I think, for the first 2 Police Academy movies. So, cutting the umbilical cord a little early right here.
Yeah.
Warner.
But yeah, Ladd made his bones by being the executive at 20th Century Fox willing to take a chance on Star Wars when nobody else wanted to do anything with Star Wars. And that's why everyone all of a sudden wanted him producing their movies for him. But not everything was necessarily working out quite so well after that.
Yeah. But hey, Police Academy, they're going to hit gold, and that would have made up all the difference.
Indeed. Meanwhile, over on the other coast with the video game competition, banks cut Coleco credit line.
Coleco revealed in an SEC filing that their banks have cut their credit line by $33 million. Coleco claims this was agreed to by them because they got a $40 million tax refund, but it follows news from the week before that they laid off 1,300 workers at their Amsterdam, New York manufacturing plant, about 28% of the production workforce. Inventories had increased by 250% to $164.7 million at the end of 1983, with most of that being atom components, and the rumors of massive atom defects were given credence by Coleco reporting that it gave $24.6 million back to its customers, 3 times the 1982 number of $8.8 million.
Indeed, and that Amsterdam, New York manufacturing plant is specifically where they do their electronics manufacturing as well, so further reinforcing that they've got a serious electronics problem, which is largely a serious atom problem.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the Cabbage Patch Kid phenomenon cannot bolster this. Like you said, the factory in New York is making the electronics. The Cabbage Patch Kids are being made overseas. Mm-hmm. So while Coleco did report a slight rebound in the first quarter of 1984 with net earnings of $4.4 million as opposed to $35 million in losses the previous quarter. I mean, they had $35 million in losses in the Christmas quarter. And they had Cabbage Patch Kids. It's insane. Mm-hmm. Most of this gain seems to be from Cabbage Patch Kids, which are still back ordered and now being made by even more East Asian factories, as well as the massive cuts to Atom production. Good Times should keep going with major new releases of software for Atom and ColecoVision, as well as expansions of the Cabbage Patch line. Let's just say those expansions to the Cabbage Patch line are not going to be necessarily what we would call successful.
Yeah, Cabbage Patch is kind of a one-trick pony, and as I've said many times on the show, the saying in the toy industry is, no toy has a third Christmas. And
this one isn't even going to have a second one.
Indeed. I mean, obviously the dolls, Cabbage Patch dolls still existed when I was a kid in the late 80s, but the phenomenon is where it's just the thing for everyone to have is fast approaching the end of its shelf life.
Oh yeah. But hey, the Atom will last forever.
Right, I'm sure it will. But while there's a lot of doom and gloom in certain companies in the business, it's not true for every company as Commodore sales skyrockets.
Commodore has reported their quarterly earnings for the quarter ending March 31st. Sales were $326 million, up from $189 million from a year earlier, and profits rose from $25 million to $36 million. That's some profit right there.
That is some profit. Of course, this isn't going to last. This is kind of the tail end of the massive success that they saw in 83. Beginning of 84, it's not a very important quarter, really, and it's still kind of the afterglow of how well they did at the end of last year. But I'm not sure we're going to see all of these rosy projections as we continue our jumps later in the year.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, they still have a lot of expansion left in Europe. They still have a lot of consolidation, but yes, what we talked about several months ago when the original creator of the 6502, what's his name again?
Chuck Peddle.
Chuck Peddle said in an interview that they don't really have anything else coming down the pipeline. Is going to prove very true. I mean, the entire Plus 4 related line of computers is going to go nowhere. We'll talk a little bit more about what they're showing in Hanover. We've talked about it a little bit last month, but they're showing a bunch of different machines, and none of them is going to really be the outstanding product that the C64 was. And yeah, it's not going to go well. In another little fun side note, a class action lawsuit against Commodore chairman Irving Gould and former president and CEO Jack Tramiel has been launched, alleging withholding of product and financial information to build up personal funds by keeping Commodore stock higher than it should have been.
Irving Gould doing things to make sure the stock runs as high as possible? No, that can't be.
Yeah, who knew? Who knew? Wait until we get to the next episode, 1994. Okay. But yeah, so that happened.
Absolutely. But there's good news across the pond, too, as Acorn revenues soar.
In its first 6 months as a private company, Acorn, makers of the BBC Micro, have increased taxable profits by a whopping 156%, from £2.04 million to £5.21 million. The outlook for 1984 is just as rosy, with the production problems with the Electron behind them and inventories building up. They predict they will sell 40,000 of the cheaper machine a month compared to the current 25,000 BBC Micros they are selling. The company's big investments in setting up operations in the USA and West Germany, which cost £2.5 million, will also no doubt pay off, with initial orders for more than $50 million coming in from the school board in Washington, D.C., and another $175,000 order from Phoenix, Arizona. The Financial Times even said that $15 million in profits should be possible for the company's first full year.
Inventories building up, you say? Of course, as always, not the first time we mention this, but it always brings to mind one of the last scenes of Micromen.
Yeah. When we get to Christmas of 84, there's going to be a whole lot of electrons just sitting around gathering dust.
Yep, they missed their window. They missed their window. Yeah. It probably would have been a decent seller in 83 if they had been able to get it out in decent numbers in 83. But home computer market moves fast, and you can't afford to miss a Christmas in that market.
Well, especially with the Amstrad CPC coming down the pipeline.
Exactly.
As we've already reported.
The big difference between 83 and 84 is Lord Sugar is getting into the business. And that Electron is going to look mighty expensive compared to the competition in 1984.
Exactly. So, Acorn. It's going to be a few rocky years. They'll come out on the other side eventually, but yeah.
Did someone say Acorn Risk Machine? Yeah, but yes, this is definitely a dark period in Acorn's history. But this is a good period in history for those companies that have had the good sense to get out of this albatross that is the home computer industry / video game industry, as TI turnaround unprecedented.
Texas Instruments has announced that their income for the last 3 months was $79.8 million, a tenfold jump over a year earlier. The higher-than-expected prices for its semiconductors and rumored manufacturing of IBM PC Juniors have turned the fortunes of the former home computer maker around in a way that the computer industry has never seen before.
Yes, by just completely stopping on computers. Yeah, it's a good time to be in the silicon business because there's a lot of demand for it. But yeah, it's amazing what getting out of an industry you never should have been in the first place can do for you.
Exactly. I mean, we've talked about it here before, but there is a real serious shortage of semiconductors on the market. Yeah, there's a serious shortage of semiconductors on the market. The PC Junior contracts are looking very, very promising for a lot of these manufacturers. I mean, IBM is going big on this thing. So if you're one of the subcontractors, you've got money to play with, and it's not your risk if they don't sell. So good times, be the guy just providing the services.
Absolutely. And then on the video game side of things, Milton Bradley returns to profitability.
After losing $18.7 million in 1983 because of its Vectrex console, Milton Bradley has reported that they have disposed of 90% of the video game product, and they made a profit of $4.5 million for the first quarter, as opposed to a loss of $1.9 million the previous year, which, sans video games, would have been a profit of $255,000.
Which just goes to show that video games weren't the only problem at Milton Bradley, because a $255,000 profit for the year? What even is that? And of course, that's because Milton Bradley, historically, is primarily a board game company, and while video games have been declining, the thing that has been replacing them is the new surge in the action figure category. And Milton Bradley ain't got themselves one of those. So even as consumers are returning to traditional toys, Milton Bradley is still out of step, even with their video game inventory being largely disposed of at this point.
Yeah. Oh, and the $255,000, just as a correction, was for the quarter of the previous year. Wasn't for the whole year. Yeah.
Okay,
but even then, it's still a rounding error.
Even then, that's because that's your Christmas quarter. That's what should be your biggest quarter of the year. That makes a little more sense, but still, that's pretty puny, and it's. I mean, they're completely out of step. They tried to get into video games too late, and that was a problem. But they also are missing this new action figure wave that's coming in. They don't have a G.I. Joe or a Masters of the Universe to ride this new wave.
Exactly. And there's already rumors going about that there's takeover bids for the company. One of them is a company called Hanson Trust PLC out of London. So, MB is going to be taken over. It's just a question of who's going to do it.
I'm sure we'll never hear about that again on the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
No, definitely not. No, that won't come up.
All right. Well, turning our attention to the coin-op space, which, of course, is not doing that well at this period of time either, we see that Pizza Time losses continue to mount.
Pizza Time, home of Chuck E. Cheese, have announced that their losses for the latest quarter amounted to $75.2 million. This comes after their bankruptcy announcement from March 28th.
I know I've made this joke before, but it turns out people were not coming to Pizza Time for the pizza. Who knew?
Yeah, imagine that. Very, very surprising. And unlike what the new CEO said, they haven't figured out how to make good pizza yet. And they won't really get the chance. At least not this incarnation of the company.
Indeed. And now we turn our attention to former Pizza Time parent Atari, which closes last California factory.
250 employees at Atari's California coin-op manufacturing plant got their walking papers, ending all California-based manufacturing for the ailing video game giant. Future coin-op product will be manufactured in a facility in El Paso, Texas. According to Atari spokesperson Bruce Enton, the move will save the company $5 million a year. Company CEO James Morgan said, quote, Atari had to come to terms with what's best for the entire company, end quote. All other manufacturing had already been moved overseas prior to this. R&D will remain in Milpitas.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to keep the coin-op manufacturing, of course, in the United States, because those cabinets are big, and you're going to accrue a lot of shipping costs by making those someplace else, which is why they've kept this going, even as they've been offshoring like mad all of their computer and home video game product. But yeah, they already had the El Paso plant. That is, of course, the plant whence the infamous convoy of dump trucks left for Alamogordo to dump 5 million ETs, 10 million ETs, or was it 1 billion ETs? I don't remember anymore. But yes, that's, of course, the infamous Alamogordo dump was from the El Paso plant, which had, before that, had been a console, primarily, I think, games and peripherals manufacturing plant. Now that they're no longer doing that, they're moving the coin-op here because presumably El Paso is cheaper than Milpitas for having a manufacturing facility. But yeah, that's basically what's going on there, is they're shuffling around their assets since everything is now overseas with the exception of coin-op, which would still be too prohibitively expensive to do overseas because of those shipping costs on those cabinets.
Exactly. And a friend of the show, Kevin Hayes, who was brought over from Atari Ireland to basically be one of the head honchos at this factory, is going to get there just in time for them to announce that they're not doing this factory. As he told us in the interview. Yes. If you haven't heard that one, please go back and check it out. It's a great story. But yes, so he's then going to be taken over by Namco. Which has had a long relationship with Atari and blah, 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 blah. He's going to have an interesting career, but yeah, so this is going to be one of the fun ones where he's just like, I'm here to do this, and they're going to be like, yeah, not doing that anymore.
Funny story about that.
Yeah. Just as a side note, so everybody at home was keeping track, this move has now reduced Atari's employee count to just 2,250, down from 7,000 in January of 1983. So
Cuts keep
a
on
lot
coming.
of shedding of talent.
It absolutely is. And speaking of shedding talent, thank you for that setup there, Alan Kay leaves Atari.
You're welcome. Atari's head of research and head, quote, visionary, has left the company. He denied rumors that he was heading to Apple.
Yeah, Alan Kay, I mean, he hasn't talked much about his Atari time. I mean, certainly, I don't think anyone's interviewed him specifically about his Atari time. It just comes up in wider talks about his career. But the few interviews that he has given has said that this was basically these 2 years that he was at Atari were like the most wasted 2 years of his entire life, research life. There was a lot of disconnect, I think. I don't have a lot of insights into what was going on at Atari R&D. Certainly the traditional narrative that got kind of jumbled through Kent and cut off to pinstripes and other things like that was that Ray Kassar just cut all R&D and didn't care. That's not true, but I do get a sense that there was some tension between those that wanted to do more long-term pie-in-the-sky research and kind of more practical R&D, and I do think that Ray Kassar was more, we're looking at stuff, R&D that's going to help us in the next 5 years or something like that. Whereas people like Alan Kay were like, let's build the future. And, while Ray Kassar had definitely supported R&D and spent lavishly on R&D, I don't think building the future was ever his big thing necessarily. And then, of course, once we get into the downturn period here, with James Morgan and everything, it's like it doesn't matter whether you want to build the future or not. Nobody has money to build the future. Nobody has money to eat tomorrow. What are you talking about the future for? So, yeah, not a happy pairing as it ended up, Alan Kay and Atari.
No. And despite his denials, he is going to end up at Apple, and he's going to stay there until 1997. So it will be a longer stint. I don't know exactly what he did at Apple up until 1997. I mean, it's power PCs, I guess. He must have been involved with that and maybe some video tech. I'm not sure.
So I don't know. Our Department of Corrections will have to fill in for us here. But, of course, Alan Kay was always about the most portable of portable computers. So I have to imagine he touched what became the Newton at some point, though I don't think he was the main person leading the charge on the Newton. Because that kind of portable computing is something that has always been a passion of Alan Kay.
Oh, makes sense.
But I don't know exactly what he worked on at Apple either, outside of my remit.
Excellent. You can't do everything.
Indeed. So sticking with Atari, but turning to some console news, 5200 software drought.
Atari has cut their release slate for the 5200 to a trickle, with only Pengo and Robotron being released in the last few months, and Battlezone, Sport Goofy, and Roadrunner officially getting cancelled, while third parties like iMagic, Sunrise, and Epix, which are still busy releasing games for the ColecoVision, have no plans to port titles to Atari's Super System.
It's almost like the system has been discontinued, which I believe at this point it has, though that has not been announced to the public yet.
That would make a whole lot of sense. Do we know if the 7800 is already coming down the pipeline at this point, if they've got that worked out?
Yeah, absolutely. They already announced, I believe we talked about it in some of our prior jumps, I believe they announced at the January CES that they were going to be doing their test market in the summer, which I'm sure will absolutely happen so long as James Morgan, who is very high on the 7800, remains at Atari, which I'm sure is a thing that will be. Yes, so the 7800 has already been announced, and the press has already been like, Atari, what are you doing? Nobody wants that. And I believe back in February or something like that, they had already internally decided to cancel the 5200. But that is not public knowledge yet, which is why the magazines are being like, you'd think that they'd want a little more software for their cutting-edge video game system.
You'd think. Now, wait, were you being sarcastic with this? Is Morgan actually for the 7800, or is he more, this thing?
No, he's
really?
the one.
Okay.
Yeah, no, he felt that, and, he said this at the time in the press, and since I've interviewed him, I know that it wasn't just this is what I have to say to hype up the company. He firmly believed that Atari had gotten way too sidetracked by computers, and that the only logical way forward for the company was to get back to its roots and focus on video games. So, no, he was a big proponent of the 7800.
Interesting. Huh. Well, then, there you go. Well,
and
we'll see how that turns out.
Indeed. And continuing with Atari, but now moving overseas, German court squashes Unimex duplicator.
Former German Atari distributor, Unimex, lost a court battle to prevent an injunction requested by Atari against its Unimex SR280 cartridge duplicator. The 190 DMark device allowed Atari VCS carts to be copied to blank EEPROM carts, which could be purchased from 9 to 27 DMarks each. The device that Unimex was importing from Asia was, according to website binarium.de, only able to copy about 20% of available games.
That's right. Piracy is coming on console. It's not easy to pirate ROM-based games, but not impossible.
And where there's a will, there's a way. Yeah, I mean, and this is a kind of weird story because Unimex was the official distributor for Atari.
Yes.
They lost the rights, but they're not giving up quite yet. They still want to have a foot in this cartridge business.
Indeed. All right, then. Not much console news this month. It's almost as if the console industry is completely fallen apart and nothing's doing anything. No one's doing anything in that space anymore. Or something like that. I don't know.
This is news to me. It's not like we've talked about this at all in the past.
Indeed. So moving on to some computer hardware news, Sinclair misses another QL deadline.
Okay, and here we're getting really chronological because we got a bunch of QL stories. So this is the beginning of the month, people.
Oh, boy.
The revised end of March deadline for the first batch of QLs has been missed, and as of the first week in April, Sinclair has yet to produce a single production run of the machines. Personal Computing Weekly's order has generated £5.80 for Sinclair now by mid-April. Remember, this is the UK Weekly that's keeping a track of how much interest has accrued on their order, which Sinclair has banked, okay? These are that Sinclair has already cashed.
Yes, indeed.
Now, as a quick little aside here, so... Personal Computer News reports that several Japanese manufacturers asked about the QL could not figure out how the machine could be made profitably. They actually ran a column about this. It's an amazing read. I definitely recommend everybody check it out.
And when the Japanese can't figure out how to turn a profit on a piece of hardware.
Exactly. They're like, you're using what chip? How much memory? And you want to do what? No, this thing doesn't add up. It won't. But
yes, it's almost as if maybe Sinclair has been using hardware that can't even do what the system is supposed to be able to do. But don't worry, folks, because we have some breaking news. Sinclair finds QL workaround.
Sinclair has finally acknowledged that the 32K ROM chip that was supposed to hold both the system QDOS and Super Basic was too small and a redesign will happen. But because they had promised systems and a new board would take way too long, they will be shipping a first batch of QLs, which will ship with an extension ROM in cartridge form that will solve the problem. Yes, we're going to put something in the cartridge slot to solve the problem. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, no one's going to want to use that cartridge slot for anything else once they have the computer.
Well, who needs cartridges when you have micro drives?
Micro drives. That's right.
Of course, this means that those mail-order customers getting those gimped QLs won't be able to use any cartridge-based software, but since microdrives are so great and developers will also only have the gimped versions and will only be able to make microdrive software, all is good, right? Because remember, they're shipping this and the developers don't even have systems yet.
Mm-hmm. Because the systems have literally not worked at all.
Exactly. Oh, and because these versions of the machine will be mail order, the replacement units promised by Sinclair will have to be handled via mail order instead of in shops when they finally ship. You know, send it off. That'll work great.
Yes.
Oh, and they've also nixed the internal battery-powered clock. You know, not important for a business machine, right?
No, not at all.
To log dates and times. No, we don't need that.
Nah.
Oh, and because the system has a maximum allotment of 64K ROM address space, the larger than 32K internal ROM of the newer models will mean that the maximum size of cartridge software will now be 16K. Oh, yeah. But at least the machines will be out by the end of April. Oh, and for those wondering about the amazing gift you will get in exchange for the interest Sinclair made off of your early payment for the machine, it will be a printer cable, which would normally cost £15. So, hey, this machine, you'll have a printer cable to plug it into a printer, because that's kind of necessary in 1984.
Oh my goodness. Uncle Clive, what have you done?
Oh, yeah. No, this thing is turning into a bigger and bigger shit show. As of the final week of April, they had already taken 13,000 orders for the machine. And of course the government is already circling because an investigation is underway as to whether or not this was fraudulent advertising when they were taking the money, cashing the checks, but had no machines available for order.
Yeah, Commodore did something very similar with the PET when they launched back in 77, but the difference was Commodore did actually have a machine that kind of sort of worked at the time. They just didn't have enough money to manufacture it, so they had to take those advanced orders in order to raise the money to do a manufacturing run. But this, where the computer doesn't even work, I mean, it's just Sinclair did a lot of great things. I mean, he earned his knighthood, but his method of doing things is fine for a hobbyist home machine. It just does not work for a serious business environment. And that's what we're seeing here, is you can't cut corners in the same way for a serious business machine as you can for a hobbyist or enthusiast computer.
Of course. And yeah, the QL is just going to be such a mess. But we'll cover it in much greater detail in the months to come.
But that's quite all right. The business community isn't going to be starving for new computers, however, as the Hanover Fair sees flood of PCs.
While the Hanover Messe is a general tech fair with large industrial equipment standing side by side with lab machines, the computer offerings at the fair were still massive and, according to Personal Computer News, quote, the most depressing feature of the show was the proliferation of so-called IBM PC compatibles, end quote. Everyone and your uncle has entered the PC market, including Commodore displaying their rebranded Hyperion machine. Microcraft stood out with their new system, the Dimension, which is a 68,000 base PC compatible that promises compatibility with other machines like the Apple II through add-on boards. Lap-held micros were also on display using limited LCD displays, and various Japanese manufacturers showed off MSX-compatible micros, but none wanted to give firm launch dates, as it appears the makers have agreed to all launch at once.
I just find it amazing that in 1984 there is still a company that is trying to do the whole board-based compatibility thing. I mean, it made sense back in the late 70s when there was no clear winner in the market, and different types of machines did have different advantages, and so it made sense to have it all together. But I mean, the business world is fast becoming a PC world, and it's just unbelievable that someone is still trying a board-based. You can emulate all the computers with circuit boards. It's like nobody wants to emulate the other computers anymore.
Well, and I think it really is the fact that this change has happened in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
So if you consider that these guys probably started designing this thing 24 months ago.
Sure.
You're showing up at the fair and it's like, the color this season was green. I'm wearing a red dress.
Right.
I didn't get the memo. And I mean, it's the sad thing is we're going to keep seeing this. I'm in the process of doing the research for the next episode. I just read a long article about PC emulation boards for the Amiga. So, I mean, 10 years later, they're still going to be trying to pull this off for machines that are not the PC compatible. And Dimension is trying to make a PC. Making DOS run on a 68,000 is a fool's errand.
Yes.
It's not going to work, which is why you need the add-on boards, which it kind of defeats the whole purpose of having the 68,000 chip in there. But, oh well. That's the crazy stuff. The really weird one, though, for me in this thing was the MSX.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Japanese manufacturers clearly could launch, but they're holding off. And this machine is already getting long in the tooth.
Mm-hmm.
Any chance they had of actually coming through and making a mark, they're just wasting it here. And I don't understand what was going on. I'd love to get some inside information from the Japanese as to
absolutely
what was going on. What was the thought process here?
Yeah, I mean, I have no insights there either. But yeah, it is definitely a weird situation.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, oh, we'll get around to it. When? I mean, you already have a machine that, in comparison with the C64, it just does not bring the goods on graphics and sound. You might be able to undercut it a little bit in price if you do it fast enough.
Yeah.
But, it's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, the market did develop in a way that the producers, the MSX consortium, was not expecting. I mean, and we know, we have insight into that. We know that. Jack Tramiel really did throw them for a loop with the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64. So I don't know if that's what's going on here, if everyone is just so confused as to how to make it work that they're or if it's another matter entirely, because we don't have that insight. But certainly the MSX never becomes the standard that so many Japanese companies were hoping it would. And while it gained some traction in Japan, it just absolutely flounders everywhere else, with the exception of some Netherlands love, because Philips does get in on the consortium. But
Spain also adopts it. Everything gets released for MSX in Spain. But it's always just straight ports from the Speccy version. There's nothing specially designed for that machine.
Absolutely. But digging a little deeper on something mentioned in passing in that last story, Commodore unveils PC clone.
Yeah, we need to get into this one a little bit more. So, at the Hanover Technology Show, Commodore debuted a prototype of their Hyperion-branded PC clone. Now, this portable prototype would have 256K of RAM and be cheaper than similar IBM offerings. They also announced a desktop model. In addition to the PCs, they had also announced the C16, a 16K home computer for under $100, which led the author of the entry to the News Bites service to ask, quote, "No word as to why Commodore, with this cheaper little product, is treading on the blackened soils of Texas Instruments' demise," end quote. Yeah. And maybe it's just because I'm a Commodore fanboy, but this seems to be this weird watershed moment where if Commodore could have gotten in, they've got the license to make the 8088 chip, they've got a ready-made model. If they could have come in and really started a price war in the PC market, even if it was slightly underpowered PCs, this could have been a whole different ballgame. The fact that they're not going to push this at this point, I'd love to find out exactly. This is something I didn't ask. What's his name?
Leonard?
No, not Leonard. Leonard was gone already at this point. But the finance guy. Oh, the CFO. Greenbaum.
Okay.
So, yeah, when I talked to Dan Greenbaum, I didn't ask him about this. We talked extensively about the Amiga, but I didn't ask him about this. And it's something that if I do get a chance, I'm going to go back and talk to him.
Yeah, well, it's a weird situation all around, right? Because it's not even a Commodore computer. They licensed it from a company in Canada.
Well, that's true. But granted, they're going to do the same thing with the Amiga. I mean, they've already had that deal with the Amiga. That deal is already cooking at this point in the background.
Right, but I mean, they end up, buying Amiga outright. I mean, the Hyperion was never their computer, and it was a portable PC. Yeah. So I really do wonder what they were thinking, other than the fact that maybe since they were the gold standard in Germany for business computers, that they suddenly realized that, they were vulnerable there. And so just, in a panic move, just was like, let's get one of those. I mean, I don't think it's any accident that it was in Hanover that they introduced it for the first time. Just because that was a market where Commodore was so strong in. But yeah, it's just a weird situation all around because it's not even their computer,
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, they've rebranded it. They did make a substantial investment into Hyperion.
Yeah.
So they bought a chunk of the company. It just, I mean, one of the biggest names in PC compatibles is Compaq at this point, and they're still just doing portables. They haven't moved to desktops yet. So the portable thing doesn't really weird me out as much. It's just, why didn't they pull the trigger? Or did they have the Amiga and they were like, you know what? We're going to do the Amiga instead. We think that that's the way to go. Because that was the one thing Greenbaum said, when they launched the Amiga, they had moved to Amigas in all the offices. He was doing all the spreadsheets and the finance for the company on his Amiga.
Right.
It could just be that they said, we got the better tech, we can beat them. But I'd have to go back and talk to him again.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird situation, one that I don't have a lot of insight into.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of clones at the Hanover Fair, and one company that is certainly not happy about that is a little company called International Business Machines, as IBM looks to shut down clones.
IBM is rumored to be developing new tech to prevent the copying of its personal computers. While IBM denies the move, its recent legal actions against clone makers including Eagle and Corona Data Systems, which have both stopped production of their PC compatibles, would indicate that IBM has decided to not relinquish their dominance over the platform they created. Corona does promise that they will have a workable BIOS up and running in time for the launch of their next PC XT compatible luggable, the PPC XT, which they showed off at the West Coast Computer Fair.
Oh, IBM. The horses are gone and they're trying to close the barn door. If they had moved very quickly after the initial PC to launch some proprietary technology and patent it to prevent pirating of their future systems, that might have worked. But the problem is there are so many PC-compatible companies like Compaq out there right now that are tech giants in their own right. And so they can make a proprietary system, but their competitors at this point have the resources to make a competitor to any proprietary technology that IBM comes up with. And, we'll just see how that goes in the coming years. We'll just see how that goes for IBM.
You mean the PS2 is not going to be a massive success?
We'll see how that goes.
But nobody was ever fired for buying IBM. That's what the second stringers on MASH told me.
Oh, indeed. Yeah, no, I mean, you understand why they're doing it, because, of course, the reason everything could be copied so readily is because all of the hardware was off the shelf. And the operating system was available on a non-exclusive basis. And, you can see why IBM wants to close those loopholes and shut that door, but it's too late.
Yeah.
The PC's been around too long. The clone makers have been around too long. And IBM is losing the technology war. They are very, very shortly not going to be the technological front runner anymore in the business that they created.
That's true. Poor IBM. Feel so bad for them.
Indeed. But they are trying in every way they can to shore things up. And in addition to these rumors about the the new tech, IBM buys additional Intel shares.
IBM has purchased an additional 1.4 million shares of chipmaker Intel, bringing its share of the company up to 20%.
Yeah, they've definitely come to realize that the real powers in this business is not IBM. The real powers in this business are Intel, which makes the processors, and Microsoft, which makes the operating system. And I'm sure they want to, obviously they're not going to ever try to buy Intel outright, but I'm sure they want to have as much influence as possible over Intel, get themselves a board seat or two, et cetera, to make sure that Intel doesn't start working too closely with its competitors in the PC space, because they're starting to realize that they're in some big trouble here.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, we've talked about it over the last few months. We just mentioned the licensing of the 8088 chip to Commodore. We talked a few months ago about a whole bunch of Asian plants getting licenses to make Intel chips. So the proliferation of the designs is massive at this point. Mm-hmm. And if they don't start steering the ship a little bit, they're going to lose out completely.
Absolutely, especially since there is trouble on the home front, as PC Junior sales still dismal.
PC Junior sales continue to disappoint, and that has many software publishers taking a hard look at their plans to support the platform, especially since it won't run 40% of PC software.
I mean, it's just an astounding figure. Even 10% would be too high, as the market plays out. But 40% is just an astounding figure. And that percentage is rising by the day. Yes.
As more and more software is being written for more powerful versions of the PC. Those extremely low specs in the PC Junior is just basically, they're just being cut out further and further and further, because there's now software being developed, and you see this in things like Byte Magazine. They're talking about, this is going to be an XT only product, and you need at least this much memory in the system to run it, and so forth. And these are things that you can't even upgrade on the PC Junior. So it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and IBM missed the entire point of the home market. There are two ways that you could do the home market. You could either go the VIC-20 route or the ZX Spectrum route, which is we're just going to make something very cheap and very frivolous that is basically going to be a game machine. Or we can be like, we are going to bridge the gap between the office and the home by offering a business computer, maybe not the most powerful business computer, but still a business computer that also has some of the advanced multimedia functions that you want in the home. And the IBM PC Junior manages to be neither of those things. It is too expensive to be a frivolous time waster and too compromised to be a bridge between the home market and the office market.
Yeah. What they needed to sell was a spec-down PC with all the open slots in it. It's like, hey, your first taste is free. Oh, you want to run that bigger spreadsheet? Here's a slot for some more memory. We'll sell you that. That's what they should have been selling.
Exactly. And this could have been the way. If they had done the Tandy 1000, that could have been the way that IBM stayed relevant amongst the competition by hitting that new market that companies like Compaq were not even looking at. But instead, this Frankenstein's monster of a peanut is what they did instead. And that was just that was almost as fatal as of a side of a diversion as doing not getting the technology to the next generation fast enough. I mean, IBM is just making every misstep under the sun at this point when it comes to trying to retain dominance. I mean, they still have dominance at this point over the business because the clone makers had a lot of ground to make up, but they are just stumbling from mistake to mistake in their attempts to maintain that leadership position.
Yeah, and one of those attempts is their ad campaign. They're literally swamping TV in the U.S. And this is in addition to them already swamping TV with their Charlie Chaplin regular PC ads. And you're not old enough to remember when these were airing, do you?
No, I mean, I've seen some of these ads, retrospectively, but it's not so much that I wouldn't have been theoretically old enough, but it's also that I was living in Korea and not getting normal television ads.
Yeah. I remember these as a kid. I remember watching TV with my parents at night and just the Charlie Chaplin character. This is how I learned who Charlie Chaplin was. And these ads were literally everywhere. You couldn't flip the channel without seeing them. And IBM's ad allocation budget is up to $40 million for this campaign.
Yeah.
And this in 1984 is a lot of money for TV ads. It's a huge spend.
Truly, truly. And they're not fooling anybody. So enough on IBM's woes, however. Let's turn our attention to some of their competition again, as the next headline is just Apple II Forever.
On April 23rd and 24th, Apple held its Apple II Forever conference to unveil the Apple IIc computer. Jobs also gave an update on the first 100 days of the Mac. This comes as Apple's second quarter earnings plunged despite an increase in revenue. The plunge was due to higher marketing costs, according to CEO Scully. The Mac reached the 50,000 machines sold mark within 75 days, and production has hit 2,500 machines per day. Software is still a problem, though, as the only 3 programs available for the Mac are the same 3 that were available in January.
Yeah, and, they're trying to put a brave face on this, but they wanted more than 50,000 machines sold within the first 75 days.
Yeah. Well, they're claiming, we want to do it in 100. We did it in 75. But the reality is this thing is not selling nearly as well as they had hoped it would.
No. And, there was a lot of initial excitement which generated those first orders. But now that follow-up software is not coming, they're going to be having trouble even maintaining this early momentum, which was not as momentous as the company hoped it would be.
Exactly. It's a product in desperate search for a use.
Exactly.
Not dissimilar to the home computers, but the problem is it's not in the same budget class.
Yes.
A VIC-20 gathering dust in the closet, nobody really cares. But, your $2,000 little Macintosh thing, that better not be gathering dust.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but hey, now we got the 2C, so now we've got a gimped Apple too. Yay!
Indeed. But despite all of these storm clouds on the horizon, at this exact moment, Apple holds its own with IBM.
The dismal performance of the PC Junior means that IBM is sitting, according to the Wall Street Journal, at 20% of the personal computer market, while Apple is sitting at 18%. This analysis, interesting for stock investors, does of course belie the fact that there are a lot of PC clone makers out there.
Indeed, this really bumps up Apple's importance quite a bit. And, of course, a lot of those Apple computers are aging Apple II models, and the Apple II market is in the process of falling off a cliff. There's been a real software shift that has already started towards either the PC for business or the Commodore 64 for home users. And so, there's a lot of ways that this number looks a lot better for Apple than the actual reality is.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And You might be able to also look at it and not as 18% of units sold, but 18% of revenue, just because the machines are so massively overpriced. Right. So if it's based off of revenue, you're still paying over $1,000 for an Apple II at this point. How many Commodore 64s did you sell per Apple II? That's a very big difference in market share.
Absolutely. And, of course, I'm sure, one place that they do have a stranglehold is on the schools, and I'm sure that some of that is being reflected in the market share here as well. And while that's great to have that market, it's not going to be the most lucrative part of the market in terms of selling a lot of follow-on products like peripherals and software.
Very true, very true.
But, at least they are still hanging in there, unlike one of their Japanese competitors, as Tomy drops out of U.S. market.
Tomy Corporation of Japan has terminated its U.S. home computer operations. The Tomy Tudor computer, released in September 1983 and priced at $149, could not carve out a niche for itself in the American market and its price wars. Tomy's move follows Matsushita's withdrawal of its plans to launch the Panasonic JR200 in the U.S. and next shift of launching the PC6000 at retail to only selling it via direct sales channel.
Yeah, companies like Tomy are getting it at both ends at this point because the home computer price wars, as you said, just completely destroyed the value of a computer like this in the U.S. market. But at the same time, in Japan, these computers have been steamrolled by the family computer, by the Famicom, because it turns out that the Japanese consumer isn't really that interested in a cheap computer console hybrid, as everyone thought. They just want to play video games in the home.
Yeah, and I can only imagine that a lot of that has to be language barrier. You boot up an MSX and everything's in English. It's basic in English and everything else. That's got to be a barrier to entry that wouldn't have been a problem. School kid in the States, 8 years old, is programming BASIC. It's kind of what they already know how to read and write. Whereas Japanese kid now has to learn the logic of programming plus learn all the English vocabulary. That would have really made it more difficult to, I'm speculating, but it would have made the adoption much more difficult.
Absolutely. Turning our attention to some peripheral news, HP introduces the ThinkJet.
HP has announced the launch of the first mass-market inkjet printer. At just $495, the ThinkJet brings a new, far more silent alternative to the prevailing dot matrix printers of the day.
Man, for those of you that don't remember dot matrix printers, inkjet was such a revelation.
Oh, yeah.
Over the old dot matrix printers. Oh, my goodness.
Well, and then don't even get me started on color. Did you ever print color with a dot matrix? Oh, yeah. Boy. Or the spool had to go backwards and forwards because, you had, it was cyan, yellow, and red in order. So it would have to, it was a nightmare. Freaking nightmare.
Indeed. And that's not the only move that HP is making as moves to Asia continue as well.
Yes, HP has announced that they will be building a manufacturing plant outside of Beijing, China. The new facility will build computers and other electronic components. HP held its board of directors meeting in China in September of 1983.
Yeah, getting some mainland China offshoring going here.
Oh yeah, this was a theme that I picked up in a couple of articles this month, and it seems to be part of it is a reaction to those trade disputes with Japan, which we'll talk about a little bit more today still, and we're going to be talking about next episode when we do our 30-year jump again in a big way, and yeah, it's this move of, okay, Japan, you know, we're tired of messing with you. Oh, look, there's another place with cheap labor. And
well, yeah, and it's a place with cheap labor that's changing because you know, under Deng Xiaoping, there's kind of a reformer spirit prevailing. There was a new constitution in 1982, and huge emphasis on education and on science and technology investment, which, of course, is not something they could even think about doing during the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward, where they were mostly involved with just killing millions of their people, both accidentally and on purpose. But there's real change going on in China, which is, of course, is going to you know, kind of culminate in Tiananmen and then a big crackdown. But this is kind of the first period where China has been opening up in a way to even make this kind of investment viable instead of going to Taiwan or Hong Kong or some of those other kind of Chinese offshoot locations to do your technology manufacturing.
That's definitely true. Definitely true. Reagan also visited China on April 26th, giving a televised speech and more. You know, a lot of so there's definitely a lot of movement going on here right now, and it is going to be a big shift over the next couple of decades in how the manufacturing of all this stuff happens.
Absolutely. Moving on then from hardware into software, and we start out with a little kind of promotional news here as Bill Gates on Time cover.
Software takes center stage on the cover of the April 16th, 1984 issue of Time magazine, with Bill Gates slyly balancing a 5.25-inch floppy on his index finger.
And I'm sure the people at IBM are so happy to see Bill Gates as the face of this PC revolution going on.
Oh, yes. This comes as the New York Times has a massive breakdown of the IBM supply chain, which has encompassed a ton of companies in both hardware and software. IBM is not as reliable as some had hoped, with one hard drive maker hitting the skids when IBM decided to cut orders. Microsoft is specifically mentioned for their sales of DOS to both IBM and competing PC manufacturers, including the Macintosh, which Gates thinks could account for half of Microsoft's 1984 retail sales.
Yeah. I mean, Gates is just so smart. I mean, some of this is stuff that he developed on the fly. It's not like he had a massive, 10-year plan. But you know, he had a little language company and he dominated languages, but that's all he was in. And then IBM comes along and it's like, aha, they need an operating system. Now I can get into operating systems. And then after that, you know, the next big new frontier is the business software. You know, the Lotus 1-2-3s of the world, the spreadsheets and the databases and everything. And he's like, okay, well, you know, that market has already been saturated on the Apple II VisiCalc and on the IBM PC, VisiCalc and then Lotus 1-2-3, but here's the Macintosh virgin ground. So I'm going to go on the Macintosh and make a deal with Apple to learn how to do business software. And it's just like, you know, every time there's a new generation, he finds the spot where nobody's working so that he can perfect what he's doing there and then turn around and mainstream the heck out of it across the entire market. And it's just like, oh man. That guy does know how to do the business.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean, there's no one else quite like him, and that's kind of the gist of that article in Time magazine, and just this idea that software is now going to be the thing that makes it. Because guess what? It doesn't matter which PC clone you buy. But you always need the right software from the right person with the right compatibility.
Indeed. And even IBM is starting to cotton on to this a little bit, as we also have word that IBM working on GUI.
Byte Magazine reports that IBM is working on their own windowing system codenamed Glass. The system would ultimately be renamed Orion and launched in 1985 as TopView.
Yeah, again, just like we talked about in some of the IBM stories above, IBM is starting to realize that they are not at the forefront of anything happening in the PC space, and they are trying desperately to catch up, whether that is new GUI shells, new OSs, new hardware standards, etc. They're realizing far too late that it's like, oh no, we have given up all of the most important parts of the PC to our competitors. And it's not going to be too much longer before nobody's going to care whether IBM is the name on the front of that PC or not.
Exactly. They just care, will it run the stuff that I got from somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
They sent me a document. Can I open it? Yes. Well, that's all I care about.
Exactly. Meanwhile, in the home computer market, it looks like third parties abandon Atom.
Bad news for all those that purchased a Coleco Atom for the holidays. Computer Entertainer has a roundup of publishers' plans for Atom support, and it looks dire. Datamost is prepping Mr. Robot and the Robot Factory for a June CES showing, but no other games are in the works. Bruderbund has licensed Loadrunner to Coleco but won't release any games themselves for the system. Tronix has canceled plans to port their game Juice to Atom due to, quote, a change of marketing strategy to home management and education, end quote. Infocom plans data pack versions of many of their adventure games. Spoiler alert, none will ever appear. Spinnaker won't start producing Atom titles before the end of the year, despite alluding to data pack releases in some of their ColecoVision educational titles. Epix has no plans to support the Atom, despite continued plans to support the ColecoVision, and Sierra Online plans a ton of titles, including Frogger, Dragon's Keep, Prisoner, Troll's Tale, and Boxing. Just like with Infocom, none of these would get released, although BC2, Grog's Revenge, would get ported by Coleco.
Yeah, it turns out when you can't get hardware into consumer hands, software companies don't want to work with you anymore. Fun fact.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but this is a tough one because, number one, where are you going to buy those data pack weird wannabe cassettes?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You can't just now control your media. A similar problem that's going to pop up later on when Nintendo shows up and is like, oh, wait, I have to buy the cartridges through you? Wild Bill Steely talked about that extensively in my interview with him, where he was like, this whole idea that I don't get to control the production, no, I'm not doing that. I can't imagine that all of these guys had a very similar reaction. I mean, where are they going to get these data packs? They have to buy them from Coleco. There's no other maker.
Yes.
And they're not going to give that up. Yeah, we'll license it to you, Coleco, so that you can produce it, but we want our money up front for the licensing, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, Computer Entertainer also reports that there are apparent problems when trying to run some third-party ColecoVision software, such as Parker Brothers Super Cobra or Microfunds Heist, when the Atom module for the ColecoVision is plugged in. Just for everybody, remember the Atom came out as a home computer that had basically ColecoVision built into it, but there was also an Atom module so you could use your existing ColecoVision as a computer. The software works fine when the module is not installed or on a standalone Atom system, but won't run on a ColecoVision with the Atom module attached. Yeah, so... this whole multiple different systems and compatibility and different hardware configurations, it's almost like they're predating what being a PC gamer was like.
It's just, this whole thing was beyond a company like Coleco. I mean, Coleco was a toy company. And yes, they had an advanced R&D team. They had some electrical engineers on staff. They had some know-how. But they were basically trying to become a full-blown electronics company all at once. I mean, technically Nintendo went from being a toy company to an electronics company, but, they did it slowly over a couple of decades. Coleco was trying to make that transition, from the first Telstar system in 76 to the Atom launch in 83 in well under a decade. And it's just, as a company, they were not equipped to do that. And it's really showing in so many different ways. Obviously, we've already seen it in the disaster that was the Atom launch, but even in just trying to get all of these very complicated pieces of technology to talk to each other properly and be compatible with everything. That's just more than a company like Coleco was able to take on.
Yeah, no, they bit off way more than they could chew, and you just imagine what the situation would have been like had they not had Cabbage Patch. Yeah. I mean, there would not have been a Coleco in 1983. No. I mean, Atom would have wiped them out before they even got to Christmas.
Yeah. Truly. And speaking of companies biting off more than they can chew, Imagine changes course on price cut.
We reported last month that UK game developer Imagine was going to reduce the price of their games to just £3.95. Well, this month, they have decided to reverse course as the rest of the industry cried foul. Imagine stated that they realized that this move would have wiped out many smaller publishers, and that was not their intent.
More like they realized that they were selling so little of their software anymore that if they did a price cut, they weren't going to bring in enough money to make ends meet. I love how they make it so noble like this. It's like, we're not trying to destroy the industry, so we will benevolently forbear this price cut. Aren't we responsible?
Yeah. But, it's nice that they thought about it. And let's give them the benefit of the doubt that they were trying to be magnanimous and that, they are saving the industry from.
Yes, Imagine is a very, very trustworthy company. And besides, let's not forget that, the budget market has been developing for some time now without any help from Imagine whatsoever. In fact, we have another story here. UK game prices hit £1.99.
While Imagine may be pulling back, Pulsonic has launched a line of Commodore and Sinclair games at $2.99, and a new player, Mastertronic, has gone even lower at $1.99. Pulsonic admits that they aren't selling Hobbit-level games, but thinks that they are like the budget music albums that sell just fine next to full-price titles. Mastertronic, on the other hand, is claiming that they are selling top-quality products by selling the software of established software houses, albeit without mentioning the names of said houses.
We have top men working on these games. Top men.
Exactly.
Go on.
Virgin Games' Nick Alexander thinks it sounds reasonable, but doubts there are enough microcomputers in use to support software at that low price level. Oh, poor Nick, you don't understand, kids. One strategy to avoid this volume issue is the move to only support a handful of systems, mainly the Spectrum, which accounts for 9 of Mastertronic's first 12 titles, and the Commodore 64.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the primary reason that we are going to very quickly see a consolidation around 2 systems after there had been a lot of kind of lesser players in the British and European computer market before this. But, this is really, obviously nobody wants to talk about the elephant in the room here in the magazines, but all of this is really a response to piracy. This is the period, and we've talked about this before, Amstrad has released their cheap dual tape decks. More homes have dual tape decks than ever before, which makes piracy of the software easier than it's ever been before. And companies like Mastertronic are just recognizing that the only effective method they have to combat piracy is to make the games so cheap that nobody even wants to bother pirating them. It's really what all of this comes down to.
Oh, definitely. And there's, and I didn't include it here, but for the last 6 months, there's always more and more articles about attempts at sting operations, attempts at lobbying for stricter laws. Piracy, both in the US and in Europe, is becoming this major, major topic that everybody's talking about, but nobody really can figure out how to put an end to it. As consoles are fading away and the computer is coming in, the piracy issue is just the open soar. And, I mean, there's going to be a famous quote from somebody from Mastertronic talking about how, they calculated how many schools were there in England, and that was the number of games they were going to sell.
Right. And,
One per schoolyard.
In the United States, there are things you can do to try. You can try various copy protection schemes with a floppy disk. The UK market is a cassette-based market, and you just cannot protect that. Like just the nature of the medium. If somebody gets a perfectly ordinary tape deck and just plays that tape from start to finish, since it's a serial media, you can't stop them from being able to copy that exactly. You can at least try with a floppy disk, and obviously very rarely is that copy protection successful, but you can at least try. There is no try with a cassette.
Oh, no, there are tries.
Yes.
One of the big complaints, and I can't remember exactly which game it was, but one of the major titles that's out right now, they put in a color code page in the packaging.
Right.
So, you couldn't photocopy it, and it would tell you, blue, red, whatever. There's that stuff going on. There's a couple
you can do that kind of thing.
Claiming that they can put some kind of software protection in there but none of it's actually going to work.
Exactly.
But to your point about the concentration on a couple of systems, what we're seeing as a side effect of this, very popular systems are getting their games, and other ones like Arcadia Software is announcing that they will be increasing the price of their games for the Auric Atmos computer. The Auric Atmos is the new updated, partially backwards compatible with the Auric 1 computer, and they're going to be raising their prices from £5.50 to £8. According to Arcadia, this is to convince customers that the product has value. But Personal Computer News magazine thinks they may be taking advantage of software-starved Atmos and Auric owners.
I think it's probably a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B. I mean, because there is a huge piracy problem, and they're trying to come up with ways, and raising prices is not the answer. But there's definitely a lot of discussions going on about the perceived value of software, and I mean, those discussions started like at the very beginning when, when Microsoft Basic was being offered at a ludicrous price with add-on boards by MITS for the Altair. So there may have been some of that going on, giving them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But I also have no doubt that Personal Computer News is exactly right. It's like, well, we basically have a monopoly now because everyone's going away, and also fewer Auric computers are selling. So let's jack up our prices and try to make our money back. I'm sure that's the primary motivator, but the value issue is an important issue, as well in this time period. So, who knows?
That's a good point. Yeah, fun stuff.
But most people are not raising prices as a way to kind of rewrite the software model. Obviously, we have the budget model that we've just talked about in the UK, and we have another model emerging as PC Write Shareware model, a success.
Seattle-based Quicksoft's shareware model for its word processor PC Write seems to be a smashing success. We described the model last year, which allows for free sharing of the base software and encourages users to register the program for $75 to get updates and support. The program has been expanded now to include a reward for owners of registered copies who will receive a $25 check if copies of their versions later get registered. 600 such registrations have already occurred, according to Quicksoft.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes to show, though, that this version of the shareware model is not a complete unqualified success, because they definitely see that there's a huge portion of the market they're not capturing, and so basically having to bribe their users to try to capture more of the market. That doesn't seem sustainable long term.
No, but it's also an acknowledgement, I think, that they realize that people who have the complete version are also going to be making copies.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Because there's still no good, reliable way to get shareware out. You can't download this onto your computer. There's no stores or very few stores selling copies of shareware. So, somebody got the shareware, somebody registered it, and then they gave copies of it to their friends because my friend sent me a document. I need to be able to read it. So it seems like a decent model. And PC Write is going to be around for a very long time.
It is truly one of the success stories one of the few success stories of shareware, pre-90s game model. Absolutely. Because it was first. I mean, that's a big part of why I think it was successful where a lot of others weren't. But
that's true.
Yeah. And speaking of word processors, WordStar hits hard times.
MicroPro, makers of WordStar, has laid off 25 employees, and, according to the company's management, the reason is the abandoning of several projects. Management contends, though, that this is not a crisis, end quote. WordStar sales have been dwindling quickly as it is portable code, helpful for making it an industry standard during the days of CPM, is quickly becoming a hindrance in the age of the PC compatible.
little PR tip for you people there at WordStar. Never use the C word, even if you're trying to say that there is no crisis, because that's all people see is that word. They don't see the not before it. Yeah, and you've already summarized this pretty well in your summary here. It's WordStar was a standard from a different time, and being the standard on CPM is completely meaningless anymore.
Exactly. And you don't need to be able to recompile it for CPM running on a different processor, because it's just Intel all the time.
Indeed. Meanwhile, since we haven't pounded on Atari enough today yet, let's return to the company as Atari Program Exchange shuttered.
Atari has quietly closed its Program Exchange division, which had given many an aspiring programmer the chance to get their programs out to a much wider audience.
Yep. Just more cuts of things that you can't justify when you're hemorrhaging tens of millions of dollars every quarter.
Yeah. And it's kind of sad, because it was an interesting way for people, hobbyists, to get their software out there.
Absolutely.
In the pre-internet age. But, oh well. Nobody else is going to do anything like it for quite a while.
Yes, but when Atari closes a door, it also opens a window, as Atari introduces Atari Lab.
At a press conference on April 5th, Atari introduced its new series of educational products, Atari Lab, which combines scientific measuring equipment with software running on the Atari 8-bit computer systems to help users learn about science. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know much about the Atari Lab product. And I don't know what was going on at Atari to cause them to decide to introduce that, but there is definitely a movement towards more educational products on computers in this time period generally. Companies like Spinnaker and Davidson and Associates and whatnot are going to spinning up. The learning companies had some success. So it's interesting to see Atari trying to get on that bandwagon as well, though in a kind of a different kind of way.
Well, I mean, yeah, they're going pretty big. I did listen to an interview with one of the executives who was in charge of the project. And
must have been an Atic podcast, right?
Exactly.
Because they've interviewed everybody.
Exactly. And
if you haven't been interviewed by Atic, it means you don't want to talk or you're dead, pretty much at this point.
And she was talking about how, the idea of the product was really to figure out new ways of using the computer, taking it beyond just, the keyboard. And the peripherals that this had, measuring devices for air pressure or whatever they had, was a really cool concept. I mean, and it could have been a very expansive line of products. But at the end of the day, it's coming out at a time when they've, Atari's going down in flames. A lot of the planned product never comes to fruition. The quantities manufactured are extremely small. It never really has a chance.
Absolutely. And besides, people don't want to play around with barometric pressure on their computer. They just want to make fun banners, Carl. And that is why Broderbund announces the print shop.
Broderbund has announced that May will see them shipping the print shop for the Apple II. The program will allow users to print greeting cards, signs, letterhead, and more using a library of existing images and fonts, as well as import and edit existing images. The program will be compatible with a variety of printers and come with colored paper that can be reordered from the publisher.
I mean, such a brilliant idea. And of course, it was not an idea that originated with Broderbund, but it was an idea that people that they hired had before joining Broderbund and then shared with the company. But, printers have been coming down in price. More people have them. And people want other things to be able to do with them. But art programs, you just can't really have a good art program in this period of time before widespread GUI interfaces. So what's the solution? Clip art. And who has that solution? Broderbund.
Yeah. And now granted, I was a pretty heavy user of the print shop on the C64. You could draw your own patterns. You could draw your own clip art.
Oh, yeah, you absolutely could.
Was absolutely miserable. And you could edit all the clip art that was on there and save it as new clip art for later use. But yeah, this actually just made the printer suddenly a usable tool.
Exactly. It gave it a purpose in the home. I mean, obviously, printing documents at work, it had a purpose, but it didn't really have a clear purpose in the home, and this gave it that purpose. And yeah, I realized that you could do editing in the program, but that's not going to be a mass market kind of thing at this time. Yes, there were users like you that imported their own custom clip art or edited the clip art that was there, but this gave the vast majority of users the ability to feel like they were being artistic without really doing much art at all. Because
so you mean it was all AI before AI?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And speaking of home productivity software, Computer Entertainer also reviews Hesware's release of Microsoft's multi-plan for the C64 this month. And for those who haven't heard my Jay Balakrishnan interview, he talks quite extensively about this deal. And I thought it was really cool to see because, hey, we got a spreadsheet now on the C64. Woohoo!
And that's not the only thing they have going for them. I'm going to switch these around because the transition's just too good. As Hesware has also hired Nimoy.
Software publisher Hesware has hired Leonard Nimoy to be their spokesperson to lend some of that Star Trek geek cred to their lineup.
Yes, and, he's the more logical Star Trek... logical. He's the more logical Star Trek person to hire for a PC campaign, a computer campaign. Of course, Commodore went with William Shatner instead back when they were hawking their Commodore computers, but that's because he was so much cheaper, because it was right before T.J. Hooker and the Wrath of Khan kind of revitalized Shatner's career, whereas Nimoy had actually had a career after Star Trek. He'd been on Mission Impossible and other such stuff. But yeah, so it's kind of funny that Shatner would be the first Star Trek person to be hired for an ad campaign. But now Hesware is rectifying that by bringing Nimoy in. Were there any good Nimoy stories from Mr. Balakrishnan?
Oh, definitely. His interview, when we talked to him, the interview is still up only for the patrons right now. It's in the queue to come into the general feed, but it's still there. He actually talks about how he basically went to Nimoy's house, and there's this great line. I can't remember exactly what it is. Like, and Nimoy asked him if he'd like something to eat, and then Nimoy gets up and just walks into the kitchen and makes him some food. And a very down to earth guy is like, he thought, oh, somebody's going to come and do this or something. No, Nimoy comes back with the food, and this is actually an interesting bit because Hesware announces this at the same event where they also announce that they've got the license to use Fats Domino. Not Fats Domino. The hustler guy, the pool shark. What was his name?
Fats. Minnesota Fats.
Minnesota Fats. Thank you.
Yeah.
They licensed Minnesota Fats and put his face and name on a Commodore 64 pool game that they imported from England. A game called The Hustler.
Yeah.
A great game. I played that ungodly amounts as a kid. And so, it's a real marketing push because Hesware is a major player at this point because they were the first ones to really get their product into mass retail with, according to Jay, he was the first one who had peg holes built into the boxes so it could easily be hung up in stores. Punch out peg holes type of thing. So, it's a major thing. It's not going to last very long, but yeah, fun stuff. And it's
Absolutely.
A good interview. It's a fun interview. I definitely recommend everybody check it out.
Absolutely. And then moving back to the UK briefly here, Empires redefines pass and play.
The UK's Imperial Software has released their first title, Empire, a 4-player turn-based space strategy game. The game package includes 4 cassettes, 3 for each spacefaring race, and a 4th umpire tape. Each player takes their turns and passes their cassette to the umpire, which will then determine the outcomes of the moves. The cassettes are passed back to the players for the next move. The cumbersome slog of moving and loading tapes is a major hurdle for most reviewers, but those that got through it see massive appeal in the mechanics. Would it have been better online? Yes, but Imperial doesn't think there are enough users for the required connections to make an online version feasible yet. The game costs a whopping £20, but they are hoping that 4 friends will chip in to buy the game.
Because everybody loves sharing their software. It reminds me of the Simpsons episode where Milhouse and Bart and I guess Martin go in together to buy Radioactive Man #1. Oh, everyone loves sharing their their toys in that way.
Oh, definitely. But I mean, this game, I just included it because it shows 2 things. Number one, the idea of what you can do with the genres and people trying to expand the definitions of games is going insane at this point because you're now free from the consoles. You can do whatever you want. Try it. And there's enough of these computers that the idea that you're going to have these people all sitting in a room or doing it once a week, like a mail order, strategy game. It seems implausible, especially with the speed of loading off a cassette. But at the same time, one of the reviewers is just like, oh no, this was awesome. And, I can see the geeks really going for it. And another one was just like, we couldn't get the damn cassettes to load. Screw them,
Well, yeah, because that's the other. I mean, yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, yeah, it is clever, but it's not just that cassettes can take so long to load, but cassettes are very fragile. And so just the thought that you have to have, these 4 working cassettes in each copy that then are being switched out constantly, which is creating tons of wear on these cassettes, is just, it's an interesting idea. It's always fun when we see these little, dead ends trying to do these innovations, but it's like, there's no way. There's just no way.
Exactly. Oh, well.
Indeed. But turning our attention to another crisis in the UK market, Synapse withdraws from UK market.
American game publisher Synapse has been forced to pull its games from the UK, where they were being imported by Centresoft because a small software house that produces custom-designed business software, Synapse UK, has demanded the withdrawal. Centresoft covered the Synapse name with stickers, but this hasn't rectified the situation as far as Synapse UK is concerned, and Centresoft's entire inventory of Zaxxon, Quasimodo, Blue Max, Rainbow Walk, and Dimension X games have been sent back.
Do you have any good Wolasinko anecdotes about this cluster here?
I did talk to him, and he had a vague recollection that there was something, but he was going to have to look back. And before the time of recording, he was not able to get back to me. So, no, we don't have any details on this, but I did talk to Jerry about it. But the interesting thing, of course, is Centresoft is going to then launch the contracts are actually already in place for US Gold, for their label US Gold. And they'll be popping up in the next month or two. Not necessarily with these games, but there will be re-releases of Zaxxon and Blue Max with the US Gold label.
Yeah,
How much this influenced that, if at all, is what I'd love to find out. And in the book, the US Gold book, the history book on it.
I know the one.
Went through, there is no mention of this event. In the book.
I mean, you got to contact Jeff Brown. I hear he's a real nice guy and talks to people.
I've tried.
Oh, you've tried. I'm not surprised you've tried.
I've tried, and I haven't gotten him. He did not respond, and I need to try again because, I want to talk to him so bad.
Yeah, that would be a great get. And I know you'd ask him some interesting questions because you hone in on a lot of distribution stuff that a lot of other interviewers don't. I mean, the US Gold book is phenomenal, and Jeff did participate in that. But I know that you would find some interesting new things to reveal if given the chance there.
Yeah. Yeah, I contacted him. He was one of the first. He was early in the quest for interviews. I got to go back and try him again. There's a bunch of people that didn't respond the first time, but now that I've got a backlog of interviews, might be easier to convince them to jump on board.
Absolutely. We end our look then at computer software with a foray into bookware as Random House enters software biz.
Book publisher Random House is the latest big book publisher to enter the software business. They've hired David Fiore, a marketing exec from Sony, to head the new division and plan on showing off 10 programs at the upcoming CES.
Yeah, this is a real interesting phenomenon that's just getting started here that's going to go on for a year or so. This whole idea of bookware. This idea, because everyone was trying different analogies on what the computer game business was like in terms of an existing industry. And, a lot of this, especially with Activision Electronic Arts, is based on kind of the record industry model. But the success of text adventures like Infocom's games, which were phenomenally successful and were in this period really starting in the 83, 84 period, starting to get a lot of press about how successful those games has really woken up book publishers to the idea of, is this the future of fiction. And so we're going to see several book publishers, big and small, try to kind of capitalize on that over the next little bit here. And Random House here, of course, being one of those.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And that's why I thought it was a really interesting thing. Now, what those 10 programs would end up being, what actually gets released, couldn't really find anything, but, they're going big. They're pulling marketing execs from electronics companies. I mean, this is a serious move.
No, they really thought, and Simon & Schuster's going to also make a big move. I mean, they really thought, they were like, oh shit, this may be the future of books, is interactive fiction, interactive books. And they were, scared to death of being left behind. And so, yeah, it's not just a fun little sideline. I mean, they were worried enough to take it seriously. Let's put it that way. Makes sense under the circumstances. All right, moving on to a few other things then. Moving on to magazines, publications, 64er launches. Yeah. Or I guess it's a German magazine, so what? 64er launches?
64er. Yeah, you were close. So, German magazine 64er, dedicated to Commodore's home computers, has launched. The first issue has previews of what would become the Plus 4, as well as reviews of the SX64, Z80 cartridge for the C64, expansion boards, and printers. The magazine's focus on the serious computer user is there from day one, with complex hardware deep dives, explanations about how the VIC and SID chips work, etc. The mag would run until 1999.
Wow. That's amazing that it lasted so long past the demise of Commodore.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it's still going to be dedicated to the C64. They will briefly try to do Amiga coverage and then drop that again. So it's going to be dedicated to the C64 until the bitter end.
Wow.
But it's 90% of the magazine, even in the video gaming heyday. The C64 is going to be about programming. It's going to be about application software. It's going to be about expansion hardware. It really is the C64 power user magazine. It's the gold standard worldwide.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on then to a bit of online news. France goes online.
While the U.S. efforts to provide computer service via phone lines are piecemeal and regional, France's postal service has gone all out on Minitel, offering a terminal to anyone who wants one. Currently, they are installing over 500 a day, and about half of households that are offered a system accepts it.
Yeah, I mean, the Minitel is truly an incredible project and truly a unique one as well, and probably set back the adoption of PCs in the home and the internet in France by a good bit compared to other developed nations, just because it was so effective and so widespread.
Oh, definitely. I mean, in France, granted, the Atari ST and the Amstrad CPC have a real foothold in France. And you see it later on in companies like Infogrames and Cocktail Vision and all these. Their lead platforms are the CPC for the longest time. And so that system's going to take off, probably because the graphics are such a leap ahead, especially in the depth of color, over the Spectrum and the C64. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Minitel is going to be like, well, what does the internet give me? Oh, email. Yes, I've had that since 1984. I can look up phone numbers. I've had that since 1984.
I can make reservations for hotels and airlines. Yeah.
With a secure payment system? I've had that since 1984.
You're just telling me about the Minitel. Go away and let me drink my wine.
Exactly.
Indeed. But France is not the only place where there are network experiments ongoing, as Games Network signs up additional franchises.
W.H. Smith, which has licensed the tech to offer downloadable games to a custom computer from American startup The Games Network, is getting ready for a big launch of the service in the UK in 1985, with 11 cable companies already signed up. Now, we've talked about the Games Network on here before. Unfortunately, I have a partial interview recorded, but not the rest of it. This is the project that in the United States is about to implode, but their technology is more or less a knockoff Apple II that they're using as a system for people to download games over the network onto the local memory. And they've already signed licenses with a bunch of companies like Broderbund and so forth to get their games on the system. And they want to offer a package of games that you would then download in a cyclical format every month. So I thought this was very interesting that W.H. Smith has licenses. They have a picture of the console in the article. They're using the same slogans and everything else. So, hey, with backing of a company like W.H. Smith, I'm kind of surprised that it didn't go any further.
Yeah.
And they're not the only ones. There is a mention of 2 other similar services in the starting blocks in England at this time as well.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Meanwhile, we have a little bit of a panic as Videotech's gone took her jabs.
An editorial column. I was wondering if you were actually going to be able to pull it off. I wrote it phonetically. Thank you. An editorial column in the April 29th edition of the New York Times postulates what the emerging interactive TV revolution will mean for society as video text replaces and denigrates newspapers, online shopping makes brick-and-mortar stores obsolete, and America turns into an endless suburb filled with people staring at their screens and living off the dole.
Now, there are some of you that would say, boy, were they prescient, but I would counter that what they should have really been worried about was leveraged buyouts by equity firms, because that's the real cause of the death of newspapers and brick-and-mortar retail and all of those other things, rather than the internet and avocado toast munching millennials.
But capitalism, good. Wall Street, greed is good, right? This is 1984.
That's right. That's right. Reaganomics, baby. It'll all trickle down. Yeah. So, I mean, no, it is very prescient. And, while I was downplaying for comedic effect, obviously we do see some impact from these things, though. It is still more leveraged buyouts by private equity firms that is driving the crisis than actually the internet.
Red Lobster isn't closing down because they sold too many all-you-can-eat shrimp meals, and it's actually because the private equity firm that bought them 20 years ago sold all the land, so now they had to pay rent? You mean that might be the reason for it? No.
And what's that? Toys R Us was actually profitable on an operating basis, but was losing tons of money because of all the debt that was piled onto them by the private equity firm that bought them? No,
it couldn't be. Sorry. Don't.
We are getting a little political, but don't take it that bridge too far, Carl. We're a video game history podcast.
We're dealing with history, with facts. Politics belongs in this realm. No, just kidding. Okay, let's keep moving on.
I will just remind any listeners that I am here as co-host on behalf of They Create Worlds LLC. So if you have any problems with anything I have said during this episode, you can direct your complaints to They Create Worlds LLC.
And since we're not dealing with politics, let's move on to the next story.
Yes, no politics in this story about Meaty throws in the towel.
Japan's Ministry of International Trade and Industry has finally given up their attempt to submit a proposed law to the Japanese legislature, the Diet, by the end of their session in May, which would have limited software protection to just 15 years and forced companies to accept licensing fees dictated by the Japanese government. This comes after the Japanese Education Ministry strongly opposed the proposal, as did the U.S. that had again criticized it at the latest trade talks in Hawaii 2 days before this news broke.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because there's two stories, there's two things going on at the same time here in the 80s, right? There's the massive Japan fear amongst the public, in the press, over everything, and the fact that the Japanese seem like they're going to dominate and take over everything, and everyone's very scared of that. But at the same time, what is actually happening behind the scenes in all of the negotiations with the Reagan government is the Japanese are actually trying to bend over backwards over and over again to not take over everything in the United States, and actually backing off from some of their more extreme positions, which is, of course, only going to help cause a massive economic meltdown in their own country. But I just find that very fascinating because, you would think just from the hysteria at the time that the Meaty proposal, because we've been tracking this for a while, would be the one that would ultimately win out because it's the one that's the more advantageous to Japanese companies. But, spoiler alert, no.
Well, the problem here is, and this is why this is the real reason I included that HP story about them opening up a factory in China. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a serious issue. There's a couple of issues going on. Yeah. The education. So MIDI is saying we need to only give 15 years protection to software. I think they're seeing it from the point of view of Japan isn't producing any software anybody gives a crap about right now.
Right.
Obviously, though, in the long run, if they had actually produced, let's say, an operating system or just all the video game content that they produce, ultimately, that has such long-term value, it would have been disastrous if all that copyright ran out after 15 years. Imagine what would have happened to Super Mario Brothers. What would have happened to Metroid? Alone, the fact that you could have made derivative works based on those characters from that point forward would have been a disaster. They're looking short-term here.
Yes.
The other problem is also that this idea of, okay, how do we prevent everybody from going elsewhere? Mm-hmm. Because you've got China now as a new place to manufacture. You've got Taiwan gearing up and as a manufacturing hub at this point.
And I hear those Koreans are starting to take a playbook out of the Japanese economic miracle.
Exactly. So while I can definitely see why Japanese people on the ground who are in the middle of the bubble economy are like, yeah, we can do whatever we want. We earned this. Well, spoiler alert, it's just basically a banking flub left over from World War II. There's no real meat on that bone. And when it crashes, it's going to crash extremely hard.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, you put it a little more eloquently than I did, but that's basically what I was saying. It's like, you've got the public perception in the United States that the Japanese are taking over everything. But the Japanese themselves, it becomes clear in all the negotiations they do with the Reagan administration in this time that the Japanese themselves know it's like, wait a minute, we're actually in a kind of awkward situation here, and we're not about to take over the world.
Well, this is the thing. I think that there's two factions at play here. I think there's a faction inside the Japanese government that's very hawkish about their prospects.
I agree.
And then there's the other ones who are like, wait a second, don't let's not get full of ourselves. Last time we did that, bad things happened. And I think that there is this, it feels like there's this real conflict inside of Japan at this point.
I think so. Absolutely.
Yeah. But, yeah, and it's fun to watch. I mean, and we will continue to watch as we go ahead. Like I said, next episode, in our 30-year jump to 1994, we will be revisiting this in a very real sense. So, okay, let's move on.
Indeed. Meanwhile, though, something a little more lighthearted as Caltech students hack Rose Bowl scoreboard.
2 Caltech students have been charged with trespass after hacking the scoreboard at the Rose Bowl and changing the display at the end of the game between UCLA and Illinois to the score of the Caltech versus MIT game, in which Caltech trounced MIT 38-9. The hack was achieved by adding an additional circuit board with a radio signal receiver to the scoreboard and then manipulating the board via a portable computer. The students were caught after giving a seminar titled Packet RF Control of Remote Digital Displays.
So they weren't so much caught as they decided to publish on their feat of hackery.
Yeah, basically.
Delightful. Delightful.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to the 2 kids. I tried to find that out. Couldn't find anything on it. But, yeah, it's one of those high-profile things. I can imagine people watching the Rose Bowl live, what the effect must have been when that happened.
Right.
It must have been fun.
And, of course, this was a period of rising hysteria about hackers after the release of the movie War Games as well, yeah. Kind of feeding into this, all part of this shift from hackers are people who just kind of do cool things to hackers are a menace to society.
And now they come for our football.
Exactly.
The geeks are coming for the football.
You don't come for the football in the US of A.
No.
Anywho, moving on, we have RCA Axe's video disc.
RCA has announced that they will discontinue manufacturing their vinyl-based video disc systems. Disc production will continue for a few more years, but the format has clearly lost the battle for acceptance to video cassette and laserdisc.
Yeah. Vinyl's dead. I mean, not forever. It's coming back, but not for video.
Not for video. I mean, we've talked about this format a million times before. Yeah. It was always destined to be a disaster. It was in development hell for way too long. And RCA lost a total of $575 million on the project. No, sorry. That was the cost. Now, how much of it was a loss, I don't know. But just
they probably didn't recoup a lot of that. Yeah, no. Probably didn't recoup a lot of that.
No.
Yeah. But while RCA is hemorrhaging money on video disc, there is a lot of money changing hands in other parts of the toy business as licensing business explodes.
While character licensing was a $4 billion business in 1978, 1983 saw it grow to $24 billion, and the number of new licensees from cartoons, comics, and video games fueling a new generation of toys, shirts, posters, etc. means that cross-media promotions are changing the way consumers, and especially kids, consume goods.
A little Star Wars here, a little Reagan-era FCC deregulation of the airwaves there, and suddenly this is what you get. And, I liked it. I mean, I grew up in this licensing-intense period, and I didn't mind being marketed to. It was a good time to be a kid.
It was a good time to be a kid. You could take all of your favorite IP everywhere, regardless of what was going on. But obviously, this is also going to create a somewhat different environment for video games to compete in.
Absolutely.
That's why I like to include it here, just because this massive pull of you're constantly bombarded with all this gimmicky stuff that is eating up your budget for purchases. And, we're not going to get licensed video games again in large quantities. We saw a little bit right before the crash, with MASH and so forth. But a real return to everything gets a licensed game, it's at least on video game consoles, is going to take a few more years. On computers, it's coming. Don't worry. I see a Miami Vice or a Street Hawk in your 7 Minutes in Heaven future. You poor bastard.
Oh, Ocean Software. And speaking of some licensing going on in the toy business, Takara pins deal with Hasbro.
After showing off their character robots toys at Toy Fair in February, Japanese toy maker Takara has penned a deal with U.S. counterpart Hasbro for 25 of these toys, which Hasbro will market in the U.S. and Canada later in the year. Takara will provide the robots on an OEM basis. The toys appear to be gaining an appeal in the U.S. just as video games are waning in popularity.
No, transforming robots. Can't say I remember that from being a kid. Nope.
No. Well, and the fun part is they're talking about them gaining acceptance because Tonka has already launched GoBots at this point.
GoBots.
And the outlook is strong for the Tonka line in 1984. So, this is, it's the upcoming thing. I wonder which of the toy lines will succeed. I mean, they're going up against Tonka GoBots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've got that head start. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. All I have to say is one of these cartoons is going to be better than the other.
No. I will say to you this day, one shall stand and one shall fall.
Very nice. I bow my head to your superior use of quotes here. But yeah, so obviously, this is Transformers. They're coming. And does this have a lot to do with video games? Not any good video games, but it does have to do with the fact that this was kind of a cool thing to see, as a little side note.
Absolutely. And wrapping up with one final story here, a D&D scare hits the UK.
A number of clergy in the UK have called for a ban on Dungeons and Dragons, fearing it will lead the youth of the nation into the hands of demon worshippers.
A little satanic panic.
Just a little bit. Just a tiny little bit. It's a very reserved, tea-sipping satanic panic.
Yes.
But, the satanic panic in the States at this point is not quite past. I mean, it's going, but it's, I haven't seen anything in the press about it at this point, or at least nothing that's come across my searches. But it's always fun to see the UK freak out about this. I mean, Life of Brian is coming too, so hey. Or is already out. When is Life of Brian? That's 84.
That's the 70s. You're thinking of Monty Python's Meaning of Life, which came out in 1983.
You're right. Oh my goodness. Was it Life of Brian is the 70s?
Yeah, it was just a couple of years after Holy Grail.
Oh my goodness. Okay, see, this is how far out of it I am at this point. Terrible. So that is the end of the stories, isn't it?
That's it.
Well, in that case, then you only have one task left, my good friend, and that is to determine the word of the episode.
Well, it was actually fairly easy this time. We've had a few that were kind of tricky these last few times. I will say this time the word is platform consolidation. As we are seeing the also-rans kind of fall away, whether it's the atom being dropped by everybody, software prices falling in the UK, leading to consolidation around just a couple of mass-produced platforms, the 5200 experiencing a drought as everyone turns away from that, or even RCA giving up on video disc in the face of the victory of video cassette and laserdisc. Platform and format consolidation seems to be a big theme in a lot of the stories that we had this month.
I can totally understand that, and that is a very, very consistent theme throughout all of this. Could have also said go big or go home.
Yeah, that's true too.
But yeah, that works perfectly. Okay, remind everybody where they can find your fine work, sir.
Absolutely. Well, as always, me and my co-host Jeffrey have our They Create Worlds podcast, doing those deep dives into video game history. The website's theycreateworlds.com. The podcast is online at podcast.theycreateworlds.com. It's available at all your standard podcast locations, and as of the time of this recording, so by the time this comes out, they may all be out finally. We are rendering the final episodes on YouTube, getting the whole back catalog up on YouTube. So all of those are going to be available, perhaps even by the time this airs. So it's still just the podcast there. I mean, we have a visualizer, but it's not like you're suddenly seeing our faces. But for those who prefer to digest their podcast content on YouTube, you can do that now with the entire They Create Worlds catalog as well.
Excellent. And everybody, remember all the links to the show notes, Patreon and everything is here. And we can probably already announce it. Our next patron hangout jointly for They Create Worlds and this wonderful show will be on Friday the 28th of June. So keep your calendars open so that you can take part in that wonderful little experience. We'll be playing some of the games that we didn't get to in 7 Minutes in Heaven episodes this month, as well as just dropping awesome trivia, taking questions, and whatever else we think of doing that might be fun. Last time we had a long discussion about what again? Keep forgetting it. We got lost on some tangent towards the end that just went on for like an extra hour that we didn't intend to do.
That sounds about right, though. I forget the details at this moment.
I can't remember. It was fun, but it got really late for me. So hopefully that's we'll see you guys there. And other than that, have fun.
Hello, 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 hello.